welcome to Creative Block. We're your hosts, VEE
and Sean. We interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam.
We asked people on our social medias if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts.
Today, we have with us DANNY HYNES. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Danny, it's such a pleasure to have you. You're like a big name in the character design community.
Word has been traveling around.
Wow, that's not very nice to hear, but I can't think like that.
You can't think like that.
No.
What's your favorite legend of you that you've heard? No.
There's gotta be one.
Is that a real question?
No.
I thought you were thinking about it. I was like,
Well,
oh, he's gonna have an answer. That's gonna be
when
fun.
I started the job, I just started at Nickelodeon. I heard that Nick Edwards was told that I was hired onto the crew, and he said, "Oh, the legend." So
Oh, really?
that's it. The legend is the legend. Yeah.
If someone was to say, I've heard of your legend, what do you think? What do you think that they would have been hearing about? What do you think people most know you for?
Probably just for doing character design on Steven Universe and Craig of the Creek. If you're at Cal Arts, it would be for being a teacher and probably having a lot of salty takes about certain animated films.
Well, I wonder if we're gonna hear any of those.
Oh my gosh!
Are we gonna play nights
fun.
tonight, or are we gonna dish the goss?
Who knows?
We just have to be a student. We have to go to Cal Arts to hear the salty takes.
Yeah, that's what they pay for. That's what the tuition's for.
Talking about Cal Arts, did you go to art school?
Yes, I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York.
Oh, nice.
Back in the early 2000s.
Did you find it that the school really helped you find your first jobs?
In a way, maybe in a more abstract way. Like I really needed art school. Like, I was, I wanted to be an animator since I was young. And specifically, I wanted to be a Disney animator. So everything you'd read in the 90s about what to do if you wanted to be a Disney animator was just learn to draw really well, and then we'll teach you all the rest. So just learn to draw really well. And so I really, really internalized that.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even think to try animation or to do anything except follow those instructions and learn to draw as well as I could. And I was like, oh yeah, well, when I get there, I'll learn.
Mm-hmm.
So going to art school was a bit of a rude awakening in that way. And like, that's when I made the first piece of animation I ever attempted. And I learned everything. And I met all the contacts, my peers and the kids I went to school with. Like Ian Jones-Cordy was the first person I met at SVA, the first day of school.
That's
That
a
is
good
so
That's a good first
crazy.
person to meet.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
great. And then I always remember seeing his first assignment in animation class. We all had to do a transformation.
Shout out episode 35 of Cradle Block where V interviewed Ian.
Yeah, it's a great one. Check it out.
I need to go check that out. I do need to check that out.
Not just Danny, you, the listener.
This is my time. So I always remember seeing Ian's first assignment where we had to animate a transformation of multiple objects. And pretty much everybody in the class just had things slowly morphing into something else. And there was no timing and there was no snap. And Ian's had snap and overshoot and settle and anticipation, and like everything that you want in animation was already happening in his first assignment. And it was just like, oh wow, I don't know anything. Yeah, so very long way to answer your question, but it was mostly the peers and like the friends that I made at school. They've been an enormous part of my career.
Mm.
And I would have been useless at a job without art school.
I think that's a great way to talk about all the benefits from art school as well. Is like the community that you get through art school is so valuable because not only do you learn from your peers, but they're also your very first network. So it is a thing where I do tend to kind of like be on the side of like telling people like art school is too expensive, just do it on your own. But you are missing out on all these great things that you
Yeah.
just described.
Yeah.
And animation is such a teamwork medium that like I think that even more than some other more solitary art forms, it's nice to have at least some period of time where you're in a learning space with other people as a team.
Yeah.
In some way.
Absolutely. And it you know, it's an entirely personal thing, you know, like I know that if Ian hadn't gone to art school, he'd still be amazing, he'd still be fine, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I would not, I needed it, or I would just be doing something else with my life. You know, if you're a complete self-starter and you can just make incredible things in your bedroom, if you're Worthy Kids, I have no idea what Worthy Kids, what his education was like, but like if you can do that, you don't need art school. Just make stuff.
Are you gonna shout out Worthy Kids
Shout out,
episode,
shout,
Sean?
out, shout out Worthy Kids. That's episode 31.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a really fun one. Worthy Kids is he's kind of like you were describing, Danny. They're like he's kind of like Louis Zong who didn't go to our school. They're just like, oh, I'll just do this thing. It sounds fun, and then they do it, and they and then they just keep doing it. That's really like interesting to hear as well. Like the community and like having guidance because sometimes it is really hard to just know what to do and how to go about like learning new skills. Do you feel like how did you land your first job? How was the jump from art school to finding your first job, and how long did it take you to find a job?
I think it was, well, I was very lucky that it wasn't quite animation, but Christmas break one year, sophomore year of college, I was walking out of class and I happened to be walking with one of my teachers, and he was like, you know, I meant to say this to the class, but I totally forgot. But like, do you want to come take a tour of Nickelodeon? He was working at Nickelodeon in Times Square at the time, and I was like, yeah, absolutely. So he took me on a tour, and of course, I brought my sketchbook with me, and he worked in the consumer products division. So, you know, drawing SpongeBob for books and folders and T-shirts. Any official licensing art was made there. So he brought me around and he introduced me to kind of his top boss, a guy named Russell Hicks. And I handed him my sketchbook and he like literally rolled through it. Like he just picked it up like a flip book, you know? He was like, "You're pretty good. You want an internship?" And I was like, "Sure." And he took a Nickelodeon hat and he put it on my head.
That
And
is kind of sweet.
yeah. And that's how I got an internship at Nickelodeon Creative Resources, where I kind of learned a lot of, you know, fundamentals, strong posing, tight, like actually how to tie down a drawing, how to make professional art, really. And I was able to turn that internship into a part-time job. So that was my college job, was doing part-time illustration for Nickelodeon Creative Resources.
That is very cool. Wow.
Which was huge for my ego and my you know, feeling like I can do this, you know. And then kind of equally huge though was that when I graduated, my art director there had a very kind meeting with me, but it was very clear too that it was like, hey, you want to do animation? And these aren't the exact words that were said, but basically we want people here where this is where they want to be and this is what they want to do. So you should go pursue animation. And that was basically a very kind way of saying there won't be work for you here, you know.
Oh, interesting.
Anymore, you know. So that was kind of, I won't say it was soul crushing. I think I had this like weird optimism, probably from having like a lucky break so early, and you know, that I was like, okay, I'll go do something else. And my friend had a job at a small studio in New York at the time called Noodle Soup. It later became World Leaders and unfortunately no longer exists. So I went there and I took an unpaid internship in exchange for Flash training. And I worked on a preschool show. And then I was able to turn that into jobs, you know.
Very cool. What show? Do you remember the name?
The show is called So Smart. I don't didn't
I think our patron Crass is gonna love this because he knows all about all the preschool shows. So I think he's gonna
really.
know. Yeah,
I
yeah.
I don't think it aired on any. I'll be very curious to know if anybody's ever heard of So Smart because I don't think it actually aired on a network.
Really?
I think
Huh.
it was created by an independently wealthy person who just
No way.
it was like a passion project. They did not have a large budget, but it was great. It was, I mean, there were I don't know if I remember what the characters looked like, but like there were these like incredibly simple shaped based characters and it was early Flash symbol animation. So you were not allowed to redraw anything. You just had to move the symbols. And there were a lot of interesting rules, like a character, you can't go more than 2 seconds without a character blinking. And
Interesting.
if a character has blinked within a second, they can't blink again. Or I don't know if those are the exact, but it was like weird, hard and fast. So it was extremely constricted, and like I tried to take an attitude of like just take what you can from this experience, you know? So the only thing you could do was focus on clear posing and clear silhouettes and just like make the leaf shaped wing arm like stretch it out from the body as far as possible and put a character up on tiptoes so that you could have them point at something or whatever that was. But the cool thing was that that studio was the studio that made Venture Brothers.
Oh, very cool.
So I was able to kind of leapfrog from small Flash job to small Flash job, and then I ended up getting a storyboard revisionist gig on Venture Brothers.
That is so cool. Man, I love that show.
That was
Um,
that was awesome.
And was that the first thing that you had worked on that you felt was closer to your natural drawing style? Or
Totally. Yeah, that was the first thing. I did get a pretty cool gig that never went anywhere where I got to do like a demo for Colbert. They wanted some weird piece of animation of like some space guy and a space woman. It was for a skit he used to have. I totally forget what it was called. But they just gave that to me. I still have no idea why they gave me the entire thing. I got to do the entire bid for Colbert. But that was the first time I got to do anything that looked anything like my natural drawings.
ooh, yeah.
And Venture Brothers was absolutely the first time where I was like, this is a job that I want. That it's not just I'm happy to have a job and I'll learn what I can. It's like, this is a job I would really go for. And everybody on the show is so amazing. It was just a huge like learning experience, like soak up everything that you can, pay attention to what everybody's doing,
Yeah.
what was one of your bigger lessons that you feel like something where you feel like you took a little bit of a leap after working on that learning wise?
Well, broadly, it was just keeping up with the talent that was around me. I was in over my head. I just was not as good as the other artists that were working there. And so it just taught me what professional drawing looks like. And in hindsight, I still look back and I'm like, oh my God, what sloppy work. But at the time, I remember like learning how to push myself to properly ink a drawing or learn things that seem basic, but they're so important. Like when you rough something in, it's only technically rough. You still have to show every piece of the drawing. You know what I mean? That like the way that you can use a rough for personal work where it's truly just a loose gesture and then you'll fill it in later. You can't do that professionally. You have to spell out every piece of the drawing. Every line of the belt must be accounted for. Every wrinkle in the fabric is part of the design. You just get to use a rough line to do it, But I remember one time, I mean, I was so lucky to have that job. And I got a lot of FaceTime with Chris McCulloch, who's fans of the show would know him better as Jackson Public. But he was the hands-on art director in the Doc Jackson team. And so we would sit and I'd present roughs and options for designs, and he'd ask my opinion, and, you know, I'd get like real input on how things would go. And I remember one time I was doing some kind of a henchman, and I had done some options, and one of them I like wanted to give him like a face shield, like a Cobra Commander, like like a mirrored face shield. And Chris was a little unsure about it, and I was like, I don't know, I think it'd be cool. And so he let me do it. And I guess like my deadline was coming up or whatever, and I kind of rushed through the finish. And I remember in the review, he was friendly about it, but he was like, "Oh man, you sold me on this." And it was like, you know, I didn't execute it to the level that it needed to be in order to sell the idea, you know?
Oh,
And
I see.
like, he didn't say all that, but it was very clear
That's
from
rough.
the context of the conversation that it was just like, right, if you're gonna pitch something, like, you have to stand behind it, and you have to be the person who carries it across the finish line, you know?
Yeah. No, that's a great story and a great piece of advice, because it is true that I think I have been in that position as well, where I've like pitched an idea, and because someone was like, "Oh, the idea sounds good," I didn't feel like I had to execute it to a level, to like I could execute it to a rough level and it would be fine. And then the problem is that there's multiple people who are like looking at it in the review, and then they all have to be sold on it. So it can't be just that one person that you were talking to about it. It has to be. So yeah. No, that's a great story, and
It's a good lesson to
perfectly
learn, but that's
illustrated.
rough.
Yeah, it hurt, but that's how you grow, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like a part of this industry as well that is like kind of hard to explain, I guess, to students or people who are like up and coming, because I had no idea how much of this kind of growing I would have to do as a professional, because it never really stops. I feel like you kind of like go through that like for years and years. Like I don't think it's ever smooth sailing. I don't know. I don't know about you guys.
You
Yeah.
don't get to the end of that. You don't get to the end of that at all.
Yeah.
Because then you just get hired on a production and everyone's like, oh, it's the legend himself. And then you have to live up to some sort of legend.
Do you feel pressure from that? Sorry, I don't know if that's too personal.
No, not at all. I mean, it's weird because, you know, I don't want to be like falsely modest and pretend that I'm not aware that I have some kind of reputation, because you hear people say things like that, or you're asking me this question. So, you know, but from my perspective, absolutely nothing changed at all, you know?
Yeah.
And like my experience on Steven Universe on a day-to-day level was still of getting my ass kicked by the job, you know?
Oh, yeah.
It was still just like trying desperately to reach the level that the show required, you know? And so, yeah, it's strange. I don't know where I went from being underqualified and like just trying to work to prove myself to, I guess it was after Steven was released and it became a little bit of a kind of a cult classic. But like, yeah, I would feel pressure if I sat around thinking about how I have some kind of reputation to live up to. But I think that's kind of profoundly unhealthy to try to like see yourself, you know? It's actually I love visual metaphor. Like as a visual person, I really like when there's a visual that I can assign to something. I like that in a world before cameras everywhere, like you literally cannot see yourself. Like your eyes allow you to take in absolutely everything relatively objectively except yourself. So that's kind of as it should be. And like I try to live that way, where it's like I don't know how I fit into some bigger narrative, and dwelling on that is kind of narcissistic and unhealthy. And so I just focus on trying to do good work.
That is so wise. And it's really interesting the way you describe that, because I don't know if this is kind of left field or like a weird way to connect these two ideas, but I feel like when I was reading your webcomic, Sorkin-esque, to me, it struck me as a character that is extremely narcissistic. So it's kind of funny that you're talking about trying to live a life that is the opposite of narcissism.
Yeah. Well, so one thing, when I got to SVA, I realized that that was when I realized that I should have been thinking about story. You would hear like platitudes like story is king, and that's why Pixar movies are so great, because Pixar was just starting their rise when I went to art school. It's like, yeah, story is king. Story is the most important thing. But I was so naive about story. I liked something and I watched it, or I didn't and I didn't watch it. And that was it. I didn't critique things. I didn't have like a nuanced understanding. And so I was like desperate to catch up and learn story, because so many of my peers were so good at story. And I still remember sitting in class and people would be like, just write what you know, just write what you know. And I would literally be sitting there in class being like, what is that? Okay, but what does that mean? Because I'm not gonna what does that mean? How do I do that? Like, I'm not gonna write about my life. That's crazy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was so naive and full of like that weird teenage combination of narcissism and self-loathing at the same time, that like the idea of writing about myself was a nightmare. And it's taken me like 20 years to kind of get to a place where I've like, Sorkin-esque is the first thing I've ever written that I'm proud of, that I'm like, I like this. Like, I wrote it, I like it well enough to execute it, and then after I execute it, I look at it and I'm like, that came out how I wanted it, and I'm happy and I'm proud. I've literally never had that experience for 20 years.
That is, wow, that is so great. Okay, so how do you push through these moments of knowing that you want to do a thing and you can't get it? Because you just described kind of like the artist's ultimate end goal, right? Like having an idea, being able to put it into word and execute it, and then being proud of it. So how do you handle the frustration of getting there, of all the work you have to do to get there?
I've spent the last 20 years living inside of that frustration and disappointment. And it's probably the work ethic that my parents and my grandfather instilled in me. My grandfather was a mechanic, and every summer he'd come over and we'd build a retaining wall for the garage, or one summer he had me install new central vacuum pipes under the house to different rooms in the house. And like, I always remember gluing those pipes together, and I glued one of them together very slightly crooked, and he had me strip all the glue and completely start again. Or like, there was a speck of dirt outside of the connection, but in the glue, he had me strip off all the glue and start it again. He was a real perfectionist, and his work was, anything he did was done as well as it could be done. So I have this like insane persistence, and my experience basically of any professional job that I've had is, I get this opportunity, I'm super, super excited, I try as hard as I can, I make something I'm not at all proud of. I choke because of nerves, because I'm so excited and I'm so hungry to prove myself that I can't just calm down and confidently do a good job. But I'm completely unwilling to accept that outcome. And so then I just dig back in and figure out how to salvage it. This is not a recommendation. I hate being this way. Like, I don't like working that way. And now that I'm finally getting to a place of like, calm down, you know how to draw. Think about what you want to draw. Draw the thing. Make a first draft. I always tell my students, you can't edit until you finish your first draft. So I really try to, and the key for that with me is that a first draft is a finished draft. A first draft is not an unfinished draft. you know? So I just try to finish the thing. And then it's actually very easy to edit, you know? Because that panic method has failed me. Nick Cross has given me some really great opportunities. And one of them was that he asked me to do some development work on Bone back when they were still doing that at Netflix.
Oh my God. Everyone, I remember that. And everyone was like, please let me. I was like, yeah, we were all making fun of each other because everybody was like, everybody's so like into that show. But I was like, but I am too, though. I really want to work on it too.
I know.
You know?
And I grew up reading Bone in Disney Adventures, you know, like that was like the first comic I ever like followed in a serialized way. And I was so excited. And I totally choked and I couldn't pull it back together. And Nick was super gracious about it, but you just know, you know, when you get a response that you're like, no, I fucked that one up, you know, like it just, and it's not like I did horrible work, but I didn't rise to the occasion, you know, like I just wasn't able to put together something that I was proud to stand behind.
No, now looking back on that, how would you do it differently or approach that differently? Knowing what you know now, like what could you have done, you think?
So what I tried to do, I let the anxiety fuel me, and I took like a clipboard and a stack of copy paper, and I just was like blowing through sketches, and I tried to nail it with like quantity, kind of just like I'll blow out all these sketches and then I'll find the best ones and then I'll clean those up. But you know, there's never enough time in animation. It doesn't matter what your schedule is. You will eat up whatever time you have. And it just got away from me. So I would calm down. I wouldn't create from a place of anxiety. And I would have focused on getting each individual piece to a place that I was happy with first. And it would have been better to have 5 pieces I was proud of than what I turned in, which is like somewhere between 25 and 40 like drawings that I wasn't that proud of. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So yeah, I would have just tried to calm myself down.
Do you feel like when you were doing so many sketches, like, well, you were talking about your anxiety, but did you also, was there also maybe like a thought of like, oh, I want to make sure Nick is happy with, like, were you thinking outside of yourself a little bit, or like was it just like pure anxiety?
No, I mean that was a huge part of it. Like I had worked with Nick before on a few things at Cartoon Network, and I'm such a huge fan of Nick. I have so much respect for him and so much gratitude for the fact that he's kind of hired me a few times. I just like really, really wanted to hit a home run for him, because you know when somebody gives you a job like that, they had to pitch you up the chain. You know, they had to be like, oh, we should hire this person, they'll be really good. You know, so they basically stuck their neck out for you. And so I really wanted to do a good job for that. And I knew also that, you know, Jeff Smith is on the other end of this thing. So this kind of cartoon hero would see it, you know. But all of that for me, and everyone's different, but all of that for me just makes more anxiety, you know. And it's just not kind of a healthy place to work from, you know.
Sure.
So, but again, this stuff took like 20 years to learn, and that job was only like a couple years ago, you know. Like you can still, just because you've made progress doesn't mean you can't fail again or make a mistake, or you know. Yeah, so it's like totally unsatisfying, but I just have to try to take the lesson to the next job, which is not Bone, you know. But like on the next gig, just calm down and do a good job and finish the first draft and then edit it if it needs to be edited. And I find when I work that way that it's just like, oh right, this is what it should look like when you do a drawing. You know, it shouldn't look like you're panicking through 30 sketches. It should just look like you did a good drawing, you know.
Oh man, yeah, that's so interesting. It's like such an interesting story too, because I don't think we've had like an experience like that described before on the show, and I think it's like really great to kind of hear like the emotions that come through when you work as an artist, because I think that's a very common experience. I feel like, especially when you're working from like a blank page, from like nothingness, like I feel like that's very common for board artists who start out in their career, because it's like, here's a script, now just like visualize everything. And I remember my first time ever doing a storyboard, and they just gave me a script and just like, and that's it. And then you're just kind of like, wait, what? Like, I'm just like, I have to like do the whole episode. Like, I have to draw the whole episode myself. And it's like,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, and then you have to like calm yourself down, because it's kind of like, wait, like, there's got to be more. There's got to be a little bit more guidance here, right?
And then
You
there's just
know?
infinity options. There's
Yeah.
infinity
Yeah.
ways to do it. And then you're like, oh, I have a joke for this part, but then that kind of tangents over here. And what if they don't like this starting joke? Then this whole section will get taken out. If the linchpin is this joke that I came up with, if they don't like it, yeah, that stuff can drive you crazy. You just have to find a way to trust your instincts and go with one vision, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so like I said, I was very lucky to get some really great jobs early in my career. But like I also then had this experience very early of one, like why am I not ecstatically happy all the time? Like this is what I've always wanted,
Mm-hmm.
and this is kind of stressful and anxiety inducing and
Yeah.
sometimes miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And that really blindsided me. I had just I in hindsight I was like, "Oh, I just decided when I was 5 that I wanted to do this thing." And
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I never actually seriously considered what that would mean. I just
Mm-hmm.
assumed that working in animation would feel like watching animation. I love watching animation, so
Mm-hmm.
working in it must be even better.
Yeah.
And I was entering the workforce with a 5-year-old's conception of what my career was going to be. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a big wake up call. So it's become important to me to like share that with my students at CalArts and
Mm-hmm.
just talk about the anxiety and talk about like I try not to be too negative, but like I want to talk about the negative emotions that can go along with it because that wasn't part of my education, and it's been a huge part of my work life.
Mm-hmm.
That's been something I've been thinking about a lot, and conversations that I have with my partner, because my job tends to be more stressful sometimes than others, but it's a time consuming job. Sometimes you're running on no sleep. Sometimes you're working on a part of the project that maybe it's a part of the project that you don't even like doing that much. I mean, animation has many steps to it, and
Yes.
this idea that we're supposed to absolutely love every part of it is kind of unfair. Like oh, if you don't love like cleanup and writing and revisions and editing or whatever it is, like if you don't like every part of that, then you like, do you really like animation? Like I think that yeah, I've been thinking about that.
Yeah. And I think we carry around with us a lot of these like unspoken expectations. Like I relate to that so much. Like, and I don't know where that came from. That's like, well, if you didn't like this part, then do you really like it? But I absolutely had that experience too. And it's like
Hmm.
no one really said that, you
Do
know?
you've
Like,
never had anybody tell you that? Because I clearly remember lore drop from my life when I was, because my first love is comics. I ended up in animation because animation's more stable than comics.
mm,
But I was like, I've always drawn comics, and I remember around the age of like 17, yeah, 17, I there's a contest in France where you can submit 4 pages of comics, and if you've never been published, and then you might get featured at the festival, the comics festival, the International Comics Festival in Angoulême. And
wow.
so I was 17, and I was trying to go for that comic contest, and my dad saw me working, and he was like, "You're taking a lot of breaks. Like, do you really like doing it?" You know?
Wow.
And
Yeah, yeah.
so I do think I take that story because I think he illustrates what society thinks of artists. they think we should be having a blast all the time and like la la
Yeah.
la painting on walls and just waltzing through, or like these trends that you see on TikTok or Instagram Reels where it's like me in my flowy white dress painting at my desk, and it's like the plants and it looks so romantic, and it's like, this is curated for
Yes.
your Instagram Reels, right? This is not real.
You're right. You're absolutely right. You also triggered some. You triggered all the times that people in school were like, "If you don't love this, you better not do it because it's gonna be painful if you don't love it." And it's like, no, I
You better
totally
love all
it.
of it.
I love it.
yeah.
And then you get there and you're like, "Oh, it's really
Yeah.
painful. Does that mean I don't love it?" No, you're absolutely right. I
Mhm.
guess I blocked it out because it was too painful.
Wow, I gave you a flashback. Like
Yeah.
I unlocked a core memory.
Yeah. God. Yeah.
We're going deep on this episode. No, but I think it's really. I'm glad that you're bringing that up, and it's funny that you brought up your students, because I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about kind of what's your philosophy on teaching, and how do you kind of guide them through these like sort of almost kind of like existential kind of themes, of like, should I be doing this?
Especially when they're seeing Twitter every day. Like
Yeah.
animation Twitter is so sad. Everyone's just like building up just like heaps and heaps and piles of like woe is me, like the world is ending, like I haven't worked in 10 years, like
Oh,
kind
God.
of posts. It's
I'm
gnarly.
so glad I got off Twitter, but
Mhm.
I was part of the problem on animation Twitter when I used it, because I was like, I accidentally figured out how Twitter used to work 5 years ago, whatever, which is like, if you post a salty take, people will engage,
That is true.
And so I would just be like, oh, here's my salty take for the day, and here's what I'm a little grumpy about today. And like, I was, in hindsight, it was just kind of like putting negativity out into the animation Twitter community, which it didn't need any more of. But yeah, I mean, to answer your actual question, I have so much anxiety about teaching.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not anymore. I've been doing it for almost 10 years, give or take a couple years. But it feels like the most important job I've had. Where like, first of all, these students are paying ungodly amounts of money for this education. So just on that level alone, I feel a real responsibility to deliver something that's worth their time and their money. But also, yeah, I mean, like, if I mess up a model and it costs Nickelodeon, I hope nobody at my job hears this, but if it costs Nickelodeon a few $1,000s to fix in revisions, like, okay, I'm sorry to the major corporation that I cost you money. But if I fail a student, like, that's terrible, like, it's personal and it feels really important. But again, like, I've kind of keep learning this lesson over and over, that like, what I always tell my students is you can't define something by what it's not, and so you can't make anything good from the fear of making something bad, so I just try to lead with like my honest experience of what it's like to work in animation, and just like be human and be within reason vulnerable with them, and then on a technical level, I wish I remembered the quote, but I once read Mobius talking about how basically impossible it is to teach art, because you would need to get to know each individual artist and what they're aiming for, and what, how they want to approach it, and
Sounds like someone who didn't want to take the time to get to know all the students.
Well, I mean,
that's what it sounds like from
No,
Mobius.
actually, I have a story about Mobius. A friend of mine, I forget if it happened to a friend of mine or a friend of mine. Anyway, that's not really relevant. But they came up to him at a convention, and they were like showing their sketchbook, and Mobius looked at it, and he was really kind. He looked at it and he was like, "You should consider being a writer," saying like, "These are great ideas." But kind of like drawing is like a whole other kind of skill, and maybe the idea realm
Could
is
you
where
imagine
you're.
showing a
Yeah.
drawing to an artist and then saying you should become a writer instead of an artist? That's such a real
But I mean, from a
man.
French person, listen, that was really nice because I feel like when I would go up to as a kid, like and show my art to like comic artists, they would be just like, "Don't do it, kid. Don't do it. It's too hard. Like, it's too hard. Like, just do something else." You're like, "No." But yeah. So anyway, the quote. Let's get back to the quote of you would have to get to know every student
Yeah.
individually.
Yes.
Um.
So I resonate with that on the level of like, I mean, even with like we have maybe 13 or 14 weeks in a semester and 3 hours a week. It's not easy to get to know
Yeah.
20 people incredibly well in that
Mhm.
time and give each of them equal time. And I'm completely uninterested in taking that room full of 20 artists and saying, so this is how you draw like Craig of the Creek and Steven Universe. And this is,
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
want to make
Yeah.
anybody clones of me. So I just try to meet them where they are and ask them
Mhm.
what they're going for. And critiques are a great way to give solid technical information where I
Mhm.
can just be like, I see what you did here. You might want to consider pushing in this direction, or this
Mhm.
seems to be what you're valuing in this drawing, and so let's explore that. Yeah. But teaching is hard. Like teaching is like, my mom is a teacher, or was a teacher before she retired. She was a special ed teacher and a reading specialist, and she was just a really good teacher who took it really really seriously. And I remember like when I first started teaching, I was like, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also kind of the most rewarding. And
Mhm.
like she seemed pleased with that answer. Like she was like, that's a healthy attitude to take toward teaching.
Mm.
So that's kind of my approach, where I just try to like really take it seriously and really like keep myself on my toes and try to be present and to some extent reinvent the class each semester so that I'm not just repeating the same
Mm.
thing over and over.
Mhm.
But teaching is hard. Like it's hard. We've all had our teachers. I mean, or we've all
Mhm.
tried to learn from other people, and like it can be interesting to hear them talk, but you might not feel that you got any better or that you
Mhm.
made any progress.
What was it like working for all those years with so many super advanced artists that really know themselves and have developed their art styles and how they work and their voice and stuff, and then going into an environment where everybody is like you're talking about, like getting to know each student, like you're also getting to know students that don't know themselves yet,
Mm.
like at least in terms of art and voice, and like they haven't made enough films or artwork to even understand their drawing styles half the time. What's that like to try to help people learn where to lean or where to go?
That's a great question. Well, to be selfish about it, the first thing was that when I began teaching, I think is when I began to like really mature as an artist, because I could see that dynamic like right in front of me. I couldn't ignore it. Like when you're face to face with a student, you can't pretend you don't know what you're doing, you know? And a
Mhm.
lot of the
Yeah.
anxiety that I was bringing to the job, that's when I started to be able to leave it behind, because like I could kind of see how far I'd come and what I was actually capable of, in contrast to my students. And so, that was kind of the first step though, was like having enough confidence in what you do know, like to be able to bring that to bear. But then it's kind of easy because it's like you do this stuff all day. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You avoid tangents, clear up silhouettes, firm up
Mhm.
the construction, plus the pose, you know, you bring a little more emotion to the expression, whatever it is, you do it all day long. And it is like, after a certain number of years, it's pretty much like breathing. And it's not a
Mhm.
question of whether or not you're going to achieve the job. It's a question of whether or not you're going to achieve the job to the level the standard that you hold yourself to. Right.
Mhm.
Um, so, and my students are unbelievably talented. Like they're amazing. But there's this kind of cool thing that I've realized, which is that even the ones who are, you know, the rock stars who are obviously just going to get snapped up by some big studio immediately after school and have a long, healthy career.
Mm-hmm.
All of my students are missing like the final 10%, you know,
Mm.
but that separates amateur work from professional work. And it's like everything that happens in the final tie down, everything that happens, like all the 100 decisions that you have to make after you've gotten what, let's call it, your tight rough approved, you know, and whatever that is,
Mm-hmm.
even once you have your board like approved by your directors and you've got to do cleanup for the week.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Mm-hmm.
so many decisions that happen in that cleanup.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The expression that read so clearly in a thumb, you try to tie it down, you might lose the shock
Mm-hmm.
and awe, and it might become a little more like giddy laughter. Like there are so many decisions that happen in that
Mm-hmm.
last. And so I think of it almost like working on a piece of artwork, it's almost like exponential, where
Mm-hmm.
like, or like water boiling, you know, where like the
Mm-hmm.
closer you are to the actual temperature of water boiling, the more is happening. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
first
Mm-hmm.
90% of the kettle being on the stove, nothing is happening. And
Mm-hmm.
those last 10 seconds, everything happens. You know, water bubbles
Mm-hmm.
and steam comes out and whistles are happening. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's very much the same with artwork. Like you can do, not that the first beginning of a drawing is nothing. You make all the big choices there,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so much work to do after all those big choices have been made. So a lot of, I think, what I hope the value I can bring to my students is like helping them see those things, you know. Another part of your question is like working with all these incredible artists. Like the biggest takeaway from me on a technical level working with Rebecca Sugar was that
Mm-hmm.
she kind of just taught me how to see better, you know.
Oh, interesting. That's very
Like
cool.
yeah, like she, you know, Rebecca is a genius and she is an unbelievably talented artist. And so she could always just see things in my drawings that I couldn't see. And saying this, it reminds me of when I was on Venture Brothers and I moved from board revisions to character design while I was on Venture Brothers. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember one time I got a note from one of my supervisors that was like, "Hey, you keep doing this thing where like the back leg and the 3/4 is wider than the front leg. Why are you doing that?"
Mm.
And in the moment, I was like, because that's what it looks like when I'm quickly roughing it in, and I'm like zoomed in so much when I'm inking it that I didn't have any idea that I was doing. Like you don't know
Oh,
what you don't know.
interesting.
It's a mistake. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
It's not like a choice. I didn't see that, so I kept doing it. You know, um,
Mm-hmm.
that's so that was like somebody teaching me to see at all. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and then working with Rebecca, it was like, you know, really teaching me how to see. You know, like, do we need this line to overlap this line, or can they end at just basically? It's not a tangent, but you know, they just connect,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. There's no tail entering the interior of the drawing. Or I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's one example, but it's a million things. Or you know, I think this eye is a little high, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, but she can see so well. Yeah, and so kind of learning to see at a higher level was a huge takeaway. So and I think all my professional jobs, that's been the really exciting thing, is like you learn something technically small. You know, you learn to make a minor adjustment to your approach,
Mm-hmm.
but like the payoff is huge. You know, like what it actually does to your work, it makes a massive difference, you know.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do think like I've had a couple moments in like my storyboard career as well that were like this when like a friend of mine sometimes we would just kind of like chat about like storyboarding and stuff and we were like, okay, what's your most important thing in storyboard? What is it that you care the most about? And I was, and he was like, oh, he was like, for me, actually, that's Etienne who was that we interviewed in a previous episode. But he was like, for me, what's important is like the flow between shots. Like, I want
Mm,
the eye to always feel like it's flowing nicely from a shot to another, so that there's never a moment when you get kind of like take like you bump out of the show. And I was like, that is so cool. When he told me that, I was like, I never really thought about it that way before.
Yeah, it's like a painting in another dimension. Like how you have like the charts and stuff that you can put over the painting to see how the eye directs, but in a third dimension instead of just two or whatever. That's interesting. Or fourth is time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. It is almost like being able to see in the fourth dimension. And that makes me think of going to animation school, and like, I don't remember the moment vividly, but I remember the feeling so vividly of like, I can see frames in moving animation now. Like,
oh, very
what I
cool.
mean? Like, I can see a drawing that's on screen for 1/24th of a second or 1/30th of a second. I can, my brain can grab it now, and like, you can see through the illusion. And yeah, like, now with Sorkin-esque, I'm like finally starting to learn a little bit about what you're talking about, V, of like, how do these things cut together, and what is the experience from this frame to that frame, and like, what does that do to your brain? And yeah, it's like this whole other level of opportunity to communicate, I guess,
Yeah, comics, dude, comics are, I love comics so much. And it's so different from boards. It's so different from animation because each panel that you draw has a weight, but that is not measured in time. And I think that is so cool. And it's so different from the way we think about it in animation. Like in animation, the weight is like how much time you spend on something, right? Or like, but in comics, my personal philosophy right now, as of right now, is like how much real estate you give the panel. I think Scott McCloud says something similar, but I mean, I read it a while ago, so I don't remember it 100%. But playing with that is so fun. I don't know. How do you feel about doing your comics and then posting them online? Because I feel like you're also doing the Instagram panel per panel that we have to do because the algorithm, blah, 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 and the way it's shown. But like, how do you feel the experience is different between your strip, because I'm sure you have a full strip that's just one page.
Strips.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have enough wisdom to make that choice, too consciously. I was pretty much just copying Nick Edwards because I thought Kingly is just so good, it's just so good. So I was just like, well, if it works for Nick, I'm gonna use this format. But it's important to me. I'm drawing all the comics on paper. I want to have originals. And so,
just like Nick.
Yeah.
Shout out Nick Edwards, episode 145, Creative Block.
Yeah.
It's really a good episode.
Dude, he's so funny.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, so I need for it to work both ways. I want for there to be a strip that works as a strip, and I want for there to be a solid experience when you're reading it on Instagram. And I got a little too deep into the strips before I really started to tackle the Instagram thing, and I got lucky. Like, I had already written into the first chapter that like a moving like a dolly shot from film would need to be translated into a comic. Like that was one of the few pieces of continuity between the strips in the first chapter, was this idea. And I just got lucky that I was able to figure out how to chop up an Instagram comic so that you can scroll continuously and it kind of creates one big image. But now I'm actually working consciously in the comics. I'm like, okay, this panel can't be this size because there's not going to be any pleasing way to present that on Instagram. And but all of that is really, really fun. That's mechanical and it's a puzzle,
Yep.
And I think my approach to everything that we do is basically mechanical. I think my mechanic grandfather had a lot of influence on me. He was also the artist who never got to pursue art, but he was really talented. So like, really got a lot from him. But I approach this in a very craftsman like way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that part is easy for me. And I really, really enjoy that part. And the thing that's unnatural is it sounds like I have no confidence. I have some confidence. But the thing that's unnatural, I'm confident that I'm a good craftsman. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't feel confident that I'm like an artist or like that my voice is worth hearing. I've written
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things over the years that I'm just like, this is garbage. This is derivative crap.
Mm.
Like this is technically these characters do something, but there's no there, you know?
Can you explain a little bit, like when you say like derivative, do you just mean like, oh, it's too much like what the inspiration was, or like what's your take on like garbage?
Yeah, I don't want to spread my leftover hipster pretensions from art school. But basically, I was untalented, in storytelling, but I had good taste. The whole Ira Glass thing.
I see.
But there are so many things to work on in animation that I kept working on the things I was good at, drawing, character design.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Mm-hmm.
great at animation, but that's what I was working on, the technical stuff. And I wasn't finishing stories, writing stories, getting stories out. So that remained kind of a weak and atrophied muscle for years.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd make a student film, to bring up Ian Jones Corday again. We'd all make a student film, and mine was like, it's finished. It happened, And his was like, well, it's the story of these two characters, and one of them has murdered the other. And it's actually, the reveal is that this is a documentary and it's being told from jail. Like there were layers of storytelling, and all of the layers of storytelling reinforced the story, the emotion, the idea. And I just did not have it like that, for years. And so also kind of a core belief of mine is that any imitation will be watered down. So like
Mm.
if you want to, my go-to example is that I used to want to draw like Glenn Keane. That was I just
Mm.
wanted to be Glenn Keane.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried for so many years to draw like Glenn Keane, and it wasn't until I got over it and I was like, you know what? Let me push a little farther and like try to draw like a more varied group of artists, that all of a sudden I was a lot more capable of getting in the ballpark. I can't draw anywhere near as well as Glenn Keane, but getting in the ballpark. Like
Mm.
it was like once I started reaching beyond it and I was failing at a higher ambition, so to speak,
Mm.
higher is the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Then where I was landing was closer to where I wanted to be. And so I try to be like almost egomaniacally ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to be as good as
Sounds so
Miyazaki.
evil.
Yeah, but it's I mean I'm really
Wielding
this
evil
is,
for good.
yeah. It's it's such a, like when I say this is like my private relationship with myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
like my artistic ambitions, I just know that whatever I shoot for, I will not get there. At best, I can maybe get 75% of the way there. And that's if I
Mm-hmm.
devoted my entire life to only trying to, let's say, draw like Miyazaki.
Mm-hmm.
But if I set my sights higher, where it's like, well, what if I could draw like Miyazaki, but I'm also trying to draw like Otomo, and I'm also trying to be as
Mm-hmm.
good at comics as Harvey Kurtzman, and also I'm going to try to be, I'm going to try to take a few cues from Will Eisner and like really, really set your sights high, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where Milk Hall is no longer the pinnacle of achievement. He's just,
Mm-hmm.
he's not the greatest draftsman of the century, actually. He's just the greatest draftsman in animation of the century,
Mm-hmm.
and actually I'm going to shoot for Alex Toth instead. And
Mm-hmm.
like, so I allow myself to compare myself to artists of that level, knowing that I will fail, but maybe I'll
Mm-hmm.
be happy with where I land in failing to get to that level.
Sure.
You know what? It's so crazy how you say that, because I had that exact same experience with like writing, because I really wanted to get good at writing, because I, want to create a show, want to like make my own stuff or like create comics, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I'm so terrible at writing, I can't do it. And I had lunch with someone who was an exec at the time and then became my manager. And she was like, and I was like, oh, I'm never gonna write like Joss Whedon, because Joss Whedon is one of my favorite, like the Coen brothers and Joss Whedon. I'm like, oh, and I'm like, I'm never gonna get there, but maybe. And she's like, why did you say that? Like, allow yourself to shoot for that, because if you don't even allow yourself to even think that way, then you can't at all be there at all. And then it's kind of crazy because I had never thought about it that way, you know. I was like, well, no, it's they're untouchable, you know. They're like, and then actually that kind of like really unlocked something for me, because then I was like, oh yeah, I can actually read their scripts and break them down and understand the math of it. I can literally just look at how many pages they take for a scene, how many lines they take to get to a joke, and all that stuff. And then you're like, you know, and it's like, oh yeah, they're just regular people, and they are just really good at what they do, but they're people, they're not like gods or whatever. And it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting experience to go through. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I like thinking of you like doing this like Joss Whedon math, and you're like, well, if I use the 35 times in the same way that Joss Whedon does, and if I make sure that I use at least 20 commas in my script, it's starting to add up. No, but it totally makes sense. No, it totally makes sense though. Like this idea of if you have a goalpost and you're trying to get there, even if you don't get there, the future you is still going to be further closer to there than you are right now. So, and that's good. Yeah.
No, for real. And I mean, I'm still talking about script and Joss Whedon and whatever, but for me, the moment when I started really breaking down writing, because before I was like, writing is like this mystical thing I don't understand, and it's like I read a thing and it's good and I don't know why. But then I started being like, well, what do you do in this paragraph? And I'm like, okay, what is happening? How many scenes is this episode? And in a scene, like, how long is the scene, and how much dialogue, what's like a good dialogue that feels good, like how long are these lines, what does it look like on the page, is there like huge chunks of text or not, like that kind of stuff. And I feel like when I did this, and I was like, okay, I'm going to track the A story, I'm going to track the B story, and I'm going to track the C or the runner and see how. And then literally, it's kind of funny. And I got this idea because sorry, I'm like going on this huge tangent, but I got this idea because I went in a writing class, and in the writing class, they talked about this guy who highlighted all the stories throughout a novel. He did it for a novel. And he kind of looked at, like, he took a step back and he was like, okay, so this is kind of how they intercut all the different states and all of the different things to keep the tension up. And then I was like, well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to highlight the different colors, the story. And then you're like, wow, there is a science to this. Like, they spend this much time with this plot, and they just, when it gets good and there's a hook, they switch over to the next storyline. And then you're like, oh yeah, these characters, I like them. And you get in that rhythm with them again, and at the moment it gets good, they switch over to and then you're like, it makes sense. I don't know, like when I found that out, I was like, oh. And then you can study it, and I don't know, being able to study a thing, I think, is really nice.
It's amazing. And like, so I mean, I think part of like the ego death of many artists is, for me, I'll speak for myself, and this actually kind of goes way back to a question you asked earlier, but like, is realizing you're not a genius, and like letting some of your, I don't mean this in like a super negative way, but just like normal teenaged childish narcissism, letting that die, you know? And, you know, I've been very lucky to work with people who actually are geniuses, and there's many incredible things about working with people like that. A rising tide lifts all boats. You get so much better working with people who are way above your level. But it also becomes very clear to me, like, I do not have that facility. I cannot see the big picture. Like, I was lucky I got to work with Alex Hirsch on a project that didn't actually end up going all the way. But like, working with Alex was incredible. You should plug his episode because it's a good one.
Oh, yeah. Episode
54 is Alex Hirsch. Go watch it, everybody.
He beat me to it. Yeah, that's a great episode on story for sure. Yeah.
It is, and listening to it like brought me back to working with Alex, and it's just like, man, he sees so much so clearly all at once, you know? And like I have a relatively myopic point of view, which is why I'm a good character designer, because he can build the entire world and the entire story and everything, and I can figure out what clothes one guy is wearing and how his hair looks. Like that's just how my brain works.
The macro and the micro, yeah.
Exactly. But I'm also really into like records and through obsessively watching any YouTube video I could find about people digging for records, I found out that the DJs, old school, vinyl DJs, can look at a record and figure out where the breakbeat is.
That is crazy.
They can stare at the grooves and they can see, look, the grooves get this wide for this amount of that's the beat, that's the breakbeat. And it's not like an exact science, but what you were saying, V, it's like once somebody has created something, once it is physically manifested in the world, it's observable, and you can study it, and you can break it down, and you can understand it. And that's why I needed school, because that's how my brain works. And I was not good enough to be employed before I started school, but I am good at studying, and I love studying, as long as I'm deeply interested in the topic, And so and like comics, I haven't given you many hot takes. I've given you a lot of sad feelings, but here's a hot take.
Hot takes, sad feelings. That's a good like podcast name or something.
Oh my God, for real. That's a shirt.
Comics is a superior medium to animation, but animation makes more money and is better to be employed in and is more fun and easier to watch. But I think comics is capable of more subtlety. I can't say better. That's a ridiculous thing to say. Comics has more of what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And as an individual or as an artist who, like, I love to focus on the one drawing. I love to craft the image, animation can be frustrating. It's so inefficient and it's so slow, and you put so much work in, and it doesn't matter how good you get the drawing, what ends up on screen will be a little bit worse. It's just the way it is, With comics, though, you get to craft the comic, and the panel is the panel, and you can make the panel. It's not about being perfect, but you can make it do all the things you want it to do. And it was through studying comics that I learned how to like create images, because so the idea of being a cartoonist is something I like really admire and respect and aspire to. Like I would love to be a cartoonist. I would love to be considered a cartoonist. And not every animation artist is a cartoonist, because a cartoonist is somebody who tells stories with pictures. And huge caveat, many, many, many animation workers are true cartoonists. That's a huge part of our job. But it is entirely possible to work in animation and to be kind of so focused with the mechanics of a drawing, just how to make the volumes full and the hair fall in the right way and everything flows together. But those drawings don't have to be telling story. They can be relying on somebody else's storytelling drawings. And so I'm describing myself for many, many years of my career. Like I was that artist. I had this myopic view, and I was good at technically drawing, but I wasn't really telling stories with my drawings. And studying cartoons and comics, it taught me how to like make the image tell the story. And it's one of those like seeing into a fourth dimension thing, like it's like it sounds like a distinction without a difference until you can see it, and then it's like the biggest difference in the world. And it's wild because it has nothing to do with the quality of the drawing. It has nothing to do with the technical ability. There are cartoonists who can't really draw very well at all, but their storytelling is unbelievable. You can do this with fumetti. You can take pictures and put word balloons on them, and you can achieve this effect of making images that have narrative power. So yeah, I just really relate to everything you were saying, because like that's how I work. I love to study things. I like to be able to break something down. To the extent that I am successful at teaching, I think that's maybe one thing that is helpful there, is that
Oh yeah,
You
because
know,
you're a student. You're
yeah,
always a. Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Mm.
And I can't just do it automatically. I have to break it down and figure out the
Yeah.
best approach, and so I can explain it. You know,
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day, I don't know why, but like, you know, it's kind of a really nasty, if you're a teacher, it's a really nasty phrase, but like those who can't do teach, you know, that old thing.
Ah, ah,
Um,
Yeah,
ah.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
And those
think
who
though,
can't teach Jim.
yeah. um, but it's like a lot of cliches. There's a nugget of truth in it. There's a reason it exists. And I think it's actually more positive than it seems. It seems like such a negative thing to say, but I think if you're an artist who just puts the pen down and the image comes out, you just start one place and you
Mhm.
go until it's done. You might not be able to explain to somebody why you did that. You know,
Mhm.
you can just do it, and you don't. So why would you waste your time breaking down? But if if it's harder for you to the point where you have to figure out how it goes together and why it goes together, well, then you have the language to communicate that to somebody else, and you
Mhm.
can
Mhm.
say, you know, well, you're going to want to use volume here because we're going to be doing a lot of animated camera moves and a lot of action. And so it's going to be important that these characters live in a dimensional space so that we can feel the impact of those fight scenes and so that the camera moves have an emotional resonance with the audience, you know, and it's not constantly calling attention to the flat design.
Mhm.
And so I got lost in my own random example, but you know, like yeah, it's important to be able. We need mechanics, is what I'm saying. You know,
Mhm.
like even animation is a deeply mechanical art form. It is assembly
Mhm.
line art. It is,
Yes.
you know, not all of it. You know, shout out to Worthy Kids
Mhm.
and Vune and you know
Yeah.
Johnny Phillips and this whole crop of like young independent animators who are just gonna completely change the industry because they're gonna start making the money that these studios wish they were making, and we're going to live in this amazing utopia where independent animation transforms the entire art form. But until
I
that
can't wait till
happens,
Worthy Kids absorbs Hulu.
yes. um
Or the kids, if you hear this, hire us in your studio.
he won't need to because he can do it all himself.
I know, exactly. That's why it's a show.
I'll bring you
But
coffee.
corporate animation is corporate and assembly line and
Yeah.
mechanical and unbelievably expensive, and so it's kind of inextricably tied to that relationship, and that needs mechanical artists, you know.
Yeah.
um
Mhm.
and when I'm laying up at night like scared of AI, these are the thoughts that comfort me, that like
Mhm.
AI is not very good at that yet. You know, AI
Mhm.
is not a very good micro technician. You know,
Yes.
like,
Mhm. I
hey, that
agree.
shoelace is like 2 pixels too high. Can we move that? You know, like whatever.
Mhm.
Like in a crazy, like a lot of animation work is that incredibly technical work.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway,
No, that's really true. I think for about AI, and it's kind of like, and everybody's, I don't know. When I saw that little clip of the CG creature
yeah,
that's like playing with the flame, I was like, holy shit, like that's it. We're donezo. And I was like, where's the Blender file? Where's the thing? And it was just like, no, it's just like, it's just painted. And I was like, oh, we're fine.
Oh,
We're fine. There's
so if
no
there's an
way.
executive that's like, can we give him a mustache and make him look kind of like my cousin and or whatever?
And
Like
most
they can't.
importantly,
Yeah.
for like a friggin' note that's like the kind of notes that you could get on some feature where it's like, can you move the camera 5 degrees to the right? And then impossible. AI can't do it. Like because they don't have like it's not real. Like all of it is just a painting. And so it has to redo everything all over again. It's not going to be able to match what it created prior
Yeah.
the same
exactly.
way, that if you had an actual set.
And
So
Also,
yeah.
executives would be like, hey, right now, can you make it look a little less weird? Like, try typing
Yes.
that into a.
Yeah.
yeah,
try...
Yes.
and you'll get back an entirely different video of an entirely
Yeah.
different creature. I mean, you know, from a character designer's perspective, look, AI is terrifying, and it's a big important fight that we need to be having right now. I don't mean
Yes.
to make light of it, but support your union. But
Yes.
but you know, from a character designer's perspective, if you lay out the amount of time that you work on a character on a production, the smallest fraction is inventing the character. I mean,
Yeah.
really the absolute smallest part is previs, development, invention. It's so much fun. It's heartbreaking to think that AI might take that part because that's the best part.
Yes.
But the rest of the job is taking those notes and drawing that character in exactly this pose with exactly this expression. And actually, we didn't realize there was a lamp in the Bee Gees. So can you redo that exact thing, but in a different composition?
Yeah.
You know, like that's the job. You know, it's being able to manipulate your drawings, and to have enough control over your craft to be able to do whatever you need to do to the same level of professionalism. And you know, just so that I'm not on here griping and talking about everything that I'm anxious about, that's what I'm good at. I'm very good at that. I have a lot of control over my drawing. So, and I take pride in that. I take pride in being a strong craftsman and like being able to nail whatever task is assigned to me.
Yeah, that's great. I think like the craftsmanship of what you mentioned, like the minutia of just kind of doing like the mouth packs and like or like posing it out a little bit different, making it fit in the frame. All of these like small things is often overlooked. I feel especially for students, like I feel like for me, when I was in school, I didn't really understand that character designer was doing all of these other things. I thought it was just like making up the characters. How did you kind of give assignments to your students that are kind of in that realm of things where it's like, okay, like kind of that are kind of targeted at these very specific or kind of what's your philosophy here when you teach, I guess?
That's a great question. So I tend to tackle most of that in note sessions.
I see.
I have a long form assignment every semester where I try to have them build a model pack. But just the time constraints, like I said, we have like 13 weeks. You want to give a variety of assignments and cover a lot of topics. So most of the assignments are invent a character, invent a character, invent a character, you know?
I see.
And so I try to cover some of that technical stuff in the review, but that's kind of the impossibility of teaching. It's like, I can't, it's all imaginary. It's all abstract. If we don't have a very specific assignment, I wouldn't make a mouth pack if nobody was paying me to make a mouth pack. I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? And I like doing that. I enjoy it. I have a whole method in Photoshop, and I
Choose the
animate
only
them
10
right on
mouths
top
that
of one
you'll ever
another.
see.
Yeah, like I'm not going to spend time thinking about exactly how high the top lip comes over the teeth when the mouth is open if no one's paying me that week, you know? And so it's the same for my students. Like, there's no reason for us to get that technical. And I think that's a large part of why a lot of students come out of art school being like, we didn't learn any of the things you actually need on the job. Everything you need, you're going to learn on the job. And it's like, that's true. But like, every production functions in a very specific way. You know, productions are set by the producers and the supervising directors, like, you know, and the showrunners. Like, the way that they want things made is how things are done, and the way to be good at that job is to do things the way those people want that job done. And so there's this incredibly dynamic approach to all of this stuff. I've been on shows where they're like, we just need 6 mouths, don't worry about it. And I've been on shows where like, we're gonna do like 16 mouths, you know, we're gonna have like 6 different I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean, like 6 different versions of open, and we're gonna differentiate between an F mouth and a V mouth. And like, you can go as nuts as you want. And so to me, it feels irresponsible to teach my students any one particular method, because the highest likelihood is that if they bring that to their first job, it's going to be wrong for that job.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you were saying if no one was paying you to make mouth packs, you wouldn't. Is there a very tedious thing that you do anyway, even though no one is paying you to do it? Like, is there a thing that you're like, oh, I have to just do it. Like I have to do this thing, and everyone else is gonna call me silly.
Well, yeah, okay, so yes and no. If no one was paying me, I wouldn't do this. Like, just being real. I'm not the kind of artist who would sit around making this stuff if I wasn't being paid to do it, which doesn't mean I don't love it. It's just that, like, I don't love sitting down drawing in my sketchbook more than I love being with my kids or spending time with my wife. You know what I mean? Or like animation is part of my life. It's not my life, you know? So, I mean, I make Sorkin-esque. That's what I would do if nobody was paying me, is I would make that kind of thing. But if you start paying me to do a job, absolutely. There are I's that I dot and T's that I cross that a lot of people would be like, I actually remember years ago, I was doing some boards for a Major Lazer music video. This was before I went to LA. And there was a really seasoned board artist who was in the pit. He could see me drawing. And this guy like had serious chops and was like really, really excellent. And he came up to me one day and he was like, you know, you undo like 10 lines that I would keep for every line that you keep, you know? And I was like, and he, he was like, I know you're probably thinking that's why you draw like you and I draw like me, which is not what I was thinking at all. And I was just like, I can't help it. Like, that's just,
dude,
this is it's just thing. How I am.
That's some board artist shit, though.
Yeah. I feel like that is so true because I was recently sitting in a stream of a comic artist that I really like, and I was watching him draw, and he hit the undo so many times I had to quit watching him because I was like, it's driving me insane, bro. Just move on. It's fine. Nobody, you're the only person who can see this. Literally. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny. Yeah. It's really funny. I feel like that's something where it's like, for me, I think I got that beaten out of me in, well, yeah, boards, because you don't really have time, but also like drawing with a pen. You know, like I feel like drawing with a pen where you just can't erase it. Like when somebody takes it away from you, you just have to go with it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's so funny. That's so interesting. Do you still do it? Do you still kind of like undo a lot, do you think?
I've gotten much better about it. And it's, I don't know if I should try to break down my insane theory. But you keep relearning the same things, right? Like you keep learning the same lessons over and over. And so like the first time I unlearned that was when I was trying to be Glenn Keane in art school, and I would, you get the rough circle for the head, and then I would go over it 5 times in blue color ace pencil. Because it felt good, because it made me feel like I was a real artist, scratching over the drawing over and yeah, drawing with Sharpie and markers and pen is how I learned to break that the first time. Yeah, I'll break it down. So I told you I like visual metaphors. So at that point, I kind of started to realize, like, anything that you learn, there's like an opposite truth. So like if you're at one point on a map, you need to go to the opposite place to kind of grow. And that's like the one-dimensional idea. And then I started working professionally, and I realized that you need to make things not just a good drawing, but the good drawing that the production needs, that the panel needs, that the scene needs, and that's when I got back into digitally undoing over and over and over and over. I was doing really tight drawings, which I taught myself to do using Sharpies, but they had to be exactly the right tight drawings. That was this big lesson.
I see.
So I came back, and it's like, it's not one-dimensional. It's kind of more two-dimensional. It's a circle. And so every time you learn something, you go to the opposite side of the circle, and then you learn more about it, and you come back around. And, then you just keep progressing in your career. And now you learn, maybe like, I got to loosen up. I got to just hit the drawing and move on, because time management, like you can see it on and a broader scale that like it's one individual drawing being right is fine, but you have to hit your deadline. Well, I didn't just learn it for no reason. I got laid off from that job.
Huh.
You know, I was taking too long, and I went through a really bad breakup, and I was super depressed, and I was like not able to pull it off, and I took too long, and I got laid off. It's the only time I've ever been fired for not doing a good enough job. So then you learn like, all right, it's not just this two-dimensional thing. Like, you have to manage your time and get all of these things done together. So like there's levels, like it's like circles stacked on top of one another, you know, and there's a base level of truth, and then there's a higher truth, and so on, you know. And then you keep working, and now it's like, all right, great that I learned how to just like nail a lot of good drawings and do it all in a timely fashion. But they actually, if I'm going to hit the next level, they all need to be perfect. Like they all need to be as good as I was trying to get that one drawing. So I just have to level up. Like I just have to be able to move through these levels with confidence and with speed. And this seems unrelated, but it was like this huge aha moment for me where I saw this internet article that the shape of the universe is a spiral.
Interesting.
And I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's because that's the shape that connects stacked circles. You know what I mean? Like, yes. You are actually, you are traveling on a circular path, and you are making movement, and, you know, like you are progressing. And that is the natural course of things that are alive, is that we move in this spiral, you know, and yeah. That's my crazy visual metaphor for what it feels like to learn about art.
No, it is so cool. That's the first time I've ever heard it in that way, and I was just like, "Yeah, bro, like it's not a circle, it's a spiral."
Yeah.
It does make sense.
I mean,
though.
you know, I spent a lot of time smoking weed when I was younger.
And then if you really want to level up, triangles are the strongest shape. So if you make a triangle spiral, then you have a Toblerone.
It's true, but do you ever try to draw a triangle spiral? It's really hard to get correct. It's a real good, if you want to like
oh my God, wait.
It's a weird slinky.
I am so scared. I'm gonna try right now, and I feel like I don't know, it's gonna be hard.
It's not easy.
I'm just drawing like you're looking through it like a slinky going back in space.
And
so
you made it a star.
It's just
Oh, there's a third page? Oh man.
Yeah. You have to come over and have fun.
Here we are. Oh, there it is. All right. No, but really, you try to draw that in perspective, and
my God,
it's not like what are we doing? And then, you know, talking about studying cartoonists, like when you look at old comics and you see like the shorthand that they had for like the old telephone cords and stuff.
Oh yeah.
You know
what
I mean? Yeah. And you're just like, man, these guys, they're just so good. You know, and talking about
there
like,
just used to be more complicated shapes in the past. We've really simplified things down.
Yeah, that's true.
So simplify shape.
Yeah, we haven't gotten better at drawing. Shapes have just gotten more simple technology as we went on. I mean, phones are just rectangles now.
Dude, drawing a smartphone though, I don't know if you guys have like gone through that, but like because in my comic, I'm trying to make it contemporary, so like they're like characters use smartphones, and it is so easy to make a phone look humongous or tiny. Like some people, and sometimes I'm like, well, it's just a comic. Nobody cares that much. And sometimes in the comics, someone will be like, well, did you notice his phone was really big? It wasn't that big, like 2 chapters ago.
Out of the comic. It totally ruined the comic for me.
No, they think it's lore. And then I'm like, I have to pretend it's like...
The lore is that this character is really, really big. And that was a normal sized phone. And that character is actually 8 foot tall. And that's the reveal.
It's like I have to pretend it was all a real like choice I made. I was like,
so
no,
silly.
I just didn't really pay attention to it.
It's always humbling to share something with an audience, you know? It's just like, oh, okay. Yeah.
That's so funny.
I like making a little tiny phone. I'm a fan of little tiny phone.
I like that. It's a good gag. It looks like an eraser. It looks like a pink pearl.
Yeah, the key is you gotta make the blue light coming out of
Oh yeah. Well,
out of the
now it's a
phone. That's how
phone.
you get it.
See,
Now it's a phone.
though that's what I learned from Miyazaki is like Alex Hirsch would call them nouns. Like when he liked the choices in a drawing, he called them good nouns. I always used to try to tell my students, it's like it's the choices you make. But like when you break down the magic of this is something nobody asked me to talk about, but when you break down the magic of Miyazaki, like well, how does he get the water to boil with the leaks inside? And like he just breaks down what's happening in these complicated visuals that we see in life. He breaks them down into these simple abstract choices. So like yeah, you would see the blue light on the phone, and it's like that one choice has so much power that it doesn't matter how crudely you describe it. It's powerful, and it expresses something like that. That's the kind of stuff that gets me. Like that's why I'm able to stay excited about character design, because like that's a magic. That's real magic, you know.
It really is. Animation really is magic, I think. And it's not only because when you put a lot of drawings like one after another, suddenly it moves. It's also just because we synthesize so much information and we have to make the audience believe that it's true. And in that sense, I think it is magic because we're just pulling things out of thin air and it's not real, but we're making them believe it's real. And I think that's really cool.
And it's not just because I wear wizard robes while I animate. No, there's a show called Stone Quackers that I worked on a long time ago, and we referenced Ponyo, how Ponyo handles water, because it might be one of my favorite stylizations of water, because at the end they end up like all of the waves are fish, like it's giant fish. And so there was this scene where they basically some characters are trying to do that thing where they make a whirlpool in a pool by going in circles, but the way that we handled the water was these big clumpy lumps, and it was such a fun stylized way of doing water that you wouldn't normally think to do. And I like he does the same thing for tears, like to make the tears look bigger. He does big old goopy globs, and I love it.
There's a model on Steven Universe called Ghibli Tears, and we also referenced Ponyo water to an unbelievable extent. I mean, yeah, it's incredible. And that scene where Ponyo is running on the giant fish waves. The last time I watched it, I was just like, man, her reflection is in perfect perspective.
Oh my god, man.
Because you can see seeing the underside of her in the reflection.
Yeah, not just a flipped image.
And it's distorted by the water.
So crazy.
And it's the choices. It's like I think Miyazaki's superpower is observation. You know, and I think that like that is the magic. And to counter my mildly hot take from before that comics are superior art form to animation, that is the magic trick. That's what animation has. The comics doesn't.
Yes.
Have. You know.
Yes.
Like maybe it's corny or whatever, but Ollie and Frank named their book The Illusion of Life because that's the magic trick, the illusion of life.
Yes.
And like that's what makes it so incredible is like you know their drawings and you absolutely know that they're thinking and feeling and going through things. And yeah
that's really cool. And I also agree that what you said about observation, but also in a way like synthesis, because I feel like Miyazaki and the water is like an example of like synthesizing information is also what makes us stronger than AI. Because I was reading an article about how AI is great at knowing lots of data and lots of facts, but it's really bad at synthesizing information together.
Yeah, there's not even one fact in my cartoons. So take that.
There's not even one fact.
It's all made up.
Maybe this is crazy, but like, isn't there a good argument to be made for the idea that 2D animation is going to come back because of AI? Because all of it, like, if you can make tons of photoreal perfectly rendered, CG animation that like the only thing that will have value and be rare is handmade, painstaking 2D animation.
Honestly, I feel kind of bad saying this because I feel bad for all the artists who perfected their skill in like painting like ultra realism, like how AI like kind of replicated this very specific art style that is like very
concept
realistic
art kind of
concept
stuff,
art-ish. And I was a little bit excited that we might go towards something more cartoony and shape driven.
Yeah, I think that's
because I was like,
yeah.
that's what I love the most. So it's very selfish, and it's maybe a hot take, because I don't want people to lose jobs, but I'm excited for a version of art that I like better to become maybe more valuable.
I kind of agree. And I mean, like, talking broadly about stylistic movements, like, on one hand, it's incredible and I love it, and it's incredibly emotionally affecting. But on the other hand, I'm kind of really tired of like unbelievably realistic performances in animation that are all referenced from like,
oh my god,
like
yes.
video footage, and it's like,
yes.
And for two reasons, like the animators are incredible and what they're doing is unbelievable, and they have pushed the art form forward in a way that is mind-blowing. But there's not that many animators who can also do what Paul Giamatti can do with their face. You know what I mean? You cannot be an actor at that level and an animator at that level. And I miss punchy, posed out choices. I miss like broad, cartoony choices. I miss like slurring 3 mouth shapes together with a head turn and having that blend of technical and emotional be the magic trick, and not having it all be, look, I made, whatever this I don't want to disparage anybody because everybody's doing incredible work, and that's not the point. But you know what I mean? Like, because I made XYZ character, I made their lip drag in exactly the way that a human's lip would drag if they turn their head. It's just less interesting than a choice, or like a real performance.
I agree. I mean, my personal philosophy and my personal tastes kind of align in that sense, where I think it's more fun and more interesting to see. I don't know. I feel like as a child, I was like, reality's so boring.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't want my cartoons to be realistic, just because I could just look at what's around me all the time and see it anyway.
It's sort of like, for a long time, a lot of the a lot of the styles that were being done in animated cartoons were pushed forward by technologies that were going forward. And I think that there maybe has come a time, at least soon, where it's sort of like, maybe it went a little too far, or maybe it went a little too far, and all of a sudden we're not even making the cartoons anymore. A robot is, and maybe we dial back and figure out what's the most human thing that you can do in an animated cartoon, and maybe that'll be getting popular, almost like, I don't know, the punk movement pushing back against political movements or whatever.
Even like the Impressionists, that's kind of what I keep thinking about. I keep thinking about like the arrival of photography and Impressionists having to kind of go in a direction that is more feelings and quote unquote impression oriented. It's funny though to read kind of how the critics were like reacting to the art show, the very first art show of like Impressionism, because they were like, well, I guess they're calling this impressionism. Well, color me impressed, I guess, by this downhill level of craft. It's really funny.
I'm sure that wore out its welcome pretty quick, that pun. I'm sure it got overused.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny going to these two museums and going to exhibitions to kind of see the context, because sometimes you kind of forget about the context and how like it was in some sort of a way kind of scandalous, of like, how dare you hang this unfinished painting on our prestigious walls? How dare you like frame this half-assed piece of art, kind of thing. It's really fun.
Well, and I mean, Alex made an interesting point. Alex Hirsch, sorry to name drop, but he made an interesting point on his episode that like animation is a young art form, and it's just now beginning to get some of the recognition that might draw some of that fine art criticism, you know, like that level of criticism. And it's so true. Like it's the art form has existed, roughly speaking, for 100 years. By the time Impressionism came along, I mean, you have a millennia of fine art and painting being taken seriously as a high art. You know, it's just not remotely comparable.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you know, it's there's a capitalist drive to it as well, you know, to the extent that we live in a capitalist society. You know, the history of animation is deeply tied to capitalism, and rarity creates value. And so when you dump an enormous amount of AI art onto the internet, and even before AI, you know, people don't buy, sell, and trade PSD files. You know, somebody had to invent NFTs just to attempt to get somebody to buy a digital image. You know, but like Photoshop file is infinitely copyable, and you get a perfect copy. It's indistinguishable from the original, you know?
Yeah.
And nobody values the original source code that says it came from your actual computer and that's verified. Maybe that'll happen in the future, but I doubt it. You know, like an original piece of paper is an original piece of paper, and it's as valuable now as it was, you know, 300, 400, 500 years ago. Like, and I think that digital art and AI will only make those things more valuable. You know, heritage auctions every day. There's like, you know, original cartoon art is a growing business, it seems. I don't really know the numbers, but like the numbers that art is selling for are going up and up and up and up. So, you know, it like that money's going to change hands, and that value is going to fall in different places. And like, I don't want to diminish the people who are going to be hurt by that disruption, but I don't think that we need to completely despair about what the outcome will be, because I think there's probably going to be some unforeseen benefits along with a lot of, you know, heartache and tragedy.
And honestly, people who can like paint these like super realistic kind of concept art, they can probably do it traditionally as well, because they have that level of skill. So they can easily translate it to something physical, I think.
I also think that I think that the existence and the selling of both NFTs combined with the AI thing is going to make a weird space that it's almost like there'll need to be a new file type that is a receipt for artists, for human art. Like it'll have the whole time-lapse drawing of like the video attached to it in some way of that a human drew it. I think that's kind of interesting.
Have you seen those like recent like scandals in like comics where they're like, well, we think this is AI, and nobody's able to tell whether or not the panels were actually AI or drawn by the artist, and then the artist has to show like, this is my time lapse and the blah blah blah, and that is really crazy. That's where I think for me NFTs are going to become valuable in terms of being like, this technology will be able to allow us to say this is the real art that a human made, because like I made it, minted it with these kind of different parameters, and this is the kind of seal of approval, the seal of like authentication, I guess. That's how I conceptualize it. I don't know if
it's
it has
weird
any
to think
grounds
about, though. But
it is. Yeah, it's so crazy.
That you guys have introduced me to a new nightmare that I hadn't thought to think about.
No, because that's a super common thing right now. A super common thing right now is that like someone will post art and then everyone will say, "Oh, this is AI," and then you have to you know, like post a time lapse of you doing the art to prove that it's real or whatever. And I almost think that at some point we may need some sort of like file, like maybe Procreate or something will build the time lapse into the file signature or something, like so that when you post it, people can see the receipts or something. It's weird to think about, though.
You're right. And
I
all of that is why I've retreated to paper, because
yeah.
like
You can't undo as much on paper though, too. I think that's probably good for you.
yeah, it makes you a stronger artist, and yeah, it's good to wrestle with that. Like, you have to make a choice, make the choice, and
Yeah.
put it down. And I mean, I always think that about TV animation, and like, I haven't worked in feature, but I've worked on things that have a bigger budget and a longer timeline,
Sure.
and it doesn't always mean better creative choices.
I
Like,
agree.
like it's there's something about, I did a lot of work at Cartoon Network, and there's something about the fact that they had, relatively compared to the rest of the industry, pretty small budgets and short timelines, and you need to churn it out. That, like, a problem comes up, you talk to the people who are involved in solving the problem, you make a choice. There's literally not time for an executive to get involved in you making that choice. There's not time. Like, you can't, like, run it up the flagpole and be like, hey, senior VP of whatever, how do you feel? Like, and when there is time to do that, it's like, it sucks a lot of the joy out for me. And so paper is a similar thing, where it's just like, no, just, you have to make the choice. And like, digital manipulation and the ability to undo, it's almost like having a split personality of middle managers, and they're all you, and you get to keep second guessing yourself as much as you possibly want, and you could be finished with something and be like, but do we want to change this color? Maybe I could undo it, and it's like, there's something fundamentally more immediate, and I think better, and certainly more human. Like, there's more of a direct connection to what's happening in your subconscious brain when you just have to make a mark and commit to it. And if you're going to change it or undo it, you're either going to paste up a different piece of paper, or you're going to paint over it in white. And I mean, anybody who's ever had to find the right white media, just finding a white that you like, that's going to allow you to, and if you're painting over the top of the white, you got to be a whole different white than if you're going to use ink on top of the white. Like, it adds real barriers to change and to second guessing yourself. And I have found that really exciting and kind of healthy for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think there's no matter what new gadget they're gonna come up with in terms of, like, it feels just like drawing on paper. There's nothing like drawing on paper. Like, like, there's it's just like, because it's what you said, it's like all the things that we don't think about, which is like how you make your choices and how you interact with the medium, which is kind of impossible to replicate with no matter what kind of digital gadget. I do want to get to some questions, because we had a lot, and we had some great questions from people, from listeners. This one's kind of fun. So our patron Crass is a little bit of a animation expert. He loves to look at all the, like, very I guess, like, indie, not indie, but very specific, forgotten productions. And he asks, what was working on There Were No Mirrors in My Nana's House like?
Hold on.
And did you work on this?
Yes.
It sounds so familiar, and I have no idea.
That is so funny.
Oh my god. How? This is like a Nardwar moment. Okay, let me double check.
Wait, so you did work on this, but you don't remember working on this? Is that?
Yes, because I was 19 years old.
Whoa.
That is
Oh my
so...
god. Okay. Wow. This is unbelievable. Working on No Mirrors in My Nana's House was an incredible moment for me. So I told you that I got my internship at Nickelodeon, and I turned that into a part-time gig.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I have no idea. I've said in hindsight so many times, but that's what we're talking about. I don't know how I kept the job or why they put up with me, because I'd made every mistake you could make. And I would constantly leave my desk and just go exploring and try to find artists to talk to and people to talk to. I just wanted to like connect with the people that were in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And through doing that, I would go downstairs and I met this artist, this animator. His name is Eric Chichester. And he became kind of like my first true mentor. And Eric had worked at DreamWorks Animation, worked on Road to El Dorado, worked on Spirit. I might have done a little bit of work on Prince of Egypt. I'm not 100% sure. But he was an assistant for James Baxter. And so he'd been trained by James Baxter. And he really took me under his wing and he taught me so much. And he took so much time out of his day just to talk to me or to teach me stuff. And Eric directed There Were No Mirrors in My Nana's House. And so he asked me if I would assist him on it. And I said yes. And I roped Ian in, and Ian and I would go into the 1515 Broadway building in New York in Times Square, and we'd bring our little light boxes, our student light boxes with us, and we'd kind of go in at the end of the day, and we'd stay after everybody left, and we'd set up at random people's desks, and they had no idea we were doing this, but we just needed a place to work. And Eric was animating on paper, and I always remember one night he had Ian and I in-betweening for him, and Eric is the sweetest, kindest, most joyful and loving man you could ever meet in your life. And Ian and I turned in some in-betweens. And I guess we were hungry and we just wanted to get them done. We wanted to show him we were doing a good job. And Eric came over with our scenes and he was like, now what is this? And like, you know, when like the dads who aren't good at being mean and they try to be mean, he was doing that, you know? And he would like keep laughing and being like, no, this is important. I need to teach you this. And he really was on some level upset. He was just not a person who was going to express genuine anger to us. But he was like, what is this? Like these circles are sloppy and like these, you're not holding these volumes. And he sat us down and we stood over his shoulder and he showed us how to take your paper off the pegs and rotate it to your key and make sure that everything is consistent to the key and how to properly in between and keep everything consistent. And he had us go back and redo it. And yeah, it was just an amazing experience. And, you know, we basically were just assistants, but like, yeah, getting to be mentored by Eric and work on that was like, it was just that was one of the first times that I was like, this is it. This is what I wanted to do. This is like what I dreamed of doing as a kid. Like working, animating on paper, working at Disney, working with a professional animator and being trained by them, you know, and nobody asked him to and nobody paid him to. And Eric just kind of did that for Ian and I because he was an incredible person and an amazing artist.
That is so sweet. Oh, I love that. That's a great story.
I still can't believe I don't know. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny. I feel like sometimes, yeah, Crest will kind of track down everybody's like very first gig and ask about it. It's kind of interesting.
That is my first animation gig. Like actually, that's my first animation gig. I wasn't paid.
They were...
Or if I was, it was, you know, it was a little bit of money under the table. I think that let me be fair to Eric. I think it was a little bit of money under the table.
I feel like, yeah, when you're like working on these like tiny projects like that, because it does look like it was like a tiny like little project that he got the chance to make, kind of like how Sean and I right now we're like making like our Adult Swim shorts, and it's kind of like we got like pennies and we could give some pennies to some people, yes. But it's like IRS, don't look at us.
But it's always like, sorry, like I hope you really just like doing this with me. Like you deserve more money. You're good at what you're doing.
But the budgets are finite.
Our patron Mallard is asking, is there a character design in media you think is absolutely brilliant that doesn't get enough love, attention, or credit?
Well, I'm not going to waste all night trying to think of the perfect answer, but what pops to mind is Peanuts, actually. There's this really great lineup from the Bill Melendez animated productions where with all of the Peanuts characters silhouetted in profile, and the extent to which they are all the same character shape, but the very specific choices of the subtle differences in the shapes of their nose and the shapes of their hair, and the shapes of their clothes, you still have absolutely instant readability of every single character.
Mm.
And I think that there's a tendency in mainstream American animation to take a more is more approach to character
Yeah.
design. Like,
Mm-hmm.
more contrast is better, and like, to have a giant character and a tiny character, and and it's like, when you're learning how to manipulate contrast, that's important. But like, if I never see another giant strong man with a neck as thick as his head and huge arms and a huge torso and tiny little stick legs and Ronald Searle shoes, like, I'll be happy. I like, it's just because there's too many artists operating under the impression that put as much contrast in as you possibly can, and that's how you arrive at a strong design. And it's like, that's a homework assignment. Like, what's
Mm-hmm.
impressive is control. What's impressive is when you master your drawings to the point where they describe to your audience exactly what you're trying to communicate to them. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what jumps into my head.
That's a
Quick
great
and answer.
answer. Mm-hmm. That one's fun too. Our patron Claire Rosenthal asked, "Can you give us one bit of character design minutia that you've learned from your many years of work? The more technical, the better."
Well, can I illustrate this one as I talk about it?
Oh yeah, of
Please,
course. That's
please
why
do it.
we're
Um,
everybody's who's listening on Spotify, make sure you check out the YouTube video so you could see the legend in action.
at work. No.
all right. So let's take a trope that I was just bashing on here. Um,
Oh, the big guy.
the big guy.
Big dude.
So I don't know if this is truly technical minutia enough, but it took me years to learn this one. So if you're trying, it's about scale basically, and that if you're trying to make a character feel bigger, or
Mhm.
a piece of a character feel bigger, you actually have to make something else smaller.
Mm.
And so the simple go-to would be that if we make this character's head smaller,
Yes.
then their body will feel kind of much bigger. But once I got kind of clued into that, I started realizing that this is like kind of a high level truism, and that it applies like all over the place. And so if you want to affect the way that the head feels, um, play around with what happens if you make like the forearm and the hand bigger. Like, what does that do? Like, that you can change things that have no direct relationship to the effect you're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
But because every piece of a drawing connects with every other piece of a drawing, and every line, I believe every line in a drawing has some kind of emotional resonance. Basically, that contrast is like omnipresent and dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
That like, you can change every other part of the drawing except the part that you're thinking of. Give him bigger pants and bigger shoes, and you've effectively shrunk the head.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
it may seem obvious, but it's like that. That's the thing that I pull out on
Yeah.
the job all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
like, what I found in being like a supervisor, that's the skill, or the trick, or however you want to look at it, that kind of has separated me from the people on my crew, where like, I'm able to solve that problem without maybe ever touching the head.
This is like drawing algebra, like bigger body,
Yeah.
like equal can also be equal to bigger knuckle, bigger like plus bigger toe plus bigger neck vein, and
Yes.
like
And the danger, the caveat is, if you make everything bigger, then nothing is bigger. And
Yeah.
if you're trying to push a design, this comes up in class, this is not something anybody has, but if you're trying to push a design, let's say this is your design and you want to push it. If you push the nose and the eye and the lip and the chin and the ear and the hair, you've just made the same drawing but bigger.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't push everything,
But to piggyback off of what V was saying earlier, if you try to draw a very small phone, suddenly they're big man with regular size phone, or no?
Yes. Well,
they can be either regular sized man with miniature phone, or it could be real size phone held by giant.
This is perfect. So, but how? Okay, so in one drawing, I know that's a joke.
No. But also, it is funny to think of you like turning in a character sheet where the note was make him bigger, and you just put like a tiny palm tree next to him in the drawing, but leave the drawing the same.
Yeah. But let's say you have one drawing. And you need to clearly communicate either that the phone is tiny or that the man is huge, right? Like this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like in that instance, we have to normalize some other piece of his character design in order to establish scale and reference, so that we know what we're looking at. Like the legs would have to become very short and have a realistic proportion to the feet, so that it was obvious that the upper body is absolutely absurdly large, and if the phone is scaled proportionally to the feet and the legs, we know the phone is actually normal sized. And and on and on and on and on and on. Like that's what I'm trying to. Thank you for giving me a clear example.
No. That's interesting to think about, because then you're dealing, with like when you introduce the small phone, then you're dealing with small phone or big man, and then you're like but the small phone has a small holster, and or whatever it is. Like you have to is watch regular sized also, like he has a little tiny watch on a big wrist, and it's like I don't know.
Exactly. And that's like, I love that. Scale is in this stage of my career, like scale is what I get excited about. Is like, how do you make all that stuff read? Is the watch tiny? And then there's this whole thing which I can't find the words for, but like the scale of the outline and the shape has a very specific relationship to the scale of the finest detail. It's kind of like you've described your macro and your micro, like you've described the entire range of scale in any given drawing. If you think about Miyazaki, it's very fixed. Like Totoro is big shapes, but Totoro has like little fur, baby fur, and like corners in the eyes, and detail in the nose. And so like that relationship is a huge part of whether something's going to read as actually tiny or, like, I don't know. It's hard to verbalize, but like, you know what I mean? Like
if you want big hand, try small nails and small knuckle hair.
Yes. Yes.
No, for real. Yeah, because Toro could have been like a miniature creature if the hair was the detail of the hair was drawn like thick, big hair. Yeah.
But it makes Totoro big. And this also is something like for all the aspiring artists who are listening, like when people say it's really good to get multiple disciplines, like in my experience, storyboard artists are really good at this stuff. Like you guys just get it, and you can do it, and you can manipulate it. You just communicate with your drawings. That's the thing of like being a cartoonist and making storytelling images. Like storyboard artists just do that all day long. Character designers, I think, like it can take us years to gain control of these things because we're so preoccupied with making pretty drawings or on model drawings, or like we're just thinking about different things. And like some of these things that I think sometimes to board artists are like, yeah, totally, I get it. Super obvious. Like I do that 100 times a day.
Yeah.
It's like it took me 10 years and it was a major revelation when I learned it,
It's like, like we're just like sketching for our whole lives.
I do think that as a board artist, I was given a lot of character design resources as well. Like I had a showrunner give me character design handouts from SpongeBob, being like, look at how they do the poses. And it is this a little bit of like this, and I from these handouts, like you can all find online for free, by the way, anybody who's like listening to this, if you look up like I think it's like Sherm Cohen SpongeBob Lively Guide to Design or something like that. I think you can find it online. Like because the showrunner was like, I want clear poses, and they wanted them in the boards, and then you just have to kind of like, yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about like that kind of stuff. But it's all like, but we never get into the details though. So like for me as a board artist, for a very long time, I was like, I can never finish a drawing. Like going into comics, the hard part was the inking and finalizing the drawing and making sure
Like what is done,
that,
what is finished.
yeah, like I think like having like the level of details, because like you kind of want to have more details on something that people are going to be like actually looking at, and you want to like pare down a lot of the details for things that are less important in your panel. So I had a hard time organizing the hierarchy of details and like thickness of line depending on like where my elements were in my panel. So like because you want to make sure people will look at your character, so you don't want the backgrounds to kind of like overpower that. So that kind of like stuff, like that kind of like finalizing your picture, like I still feel like I'm not very expert on that part.
That's part of the trap of animation and the compartmentalization of it's like it's incredible how collaborative it is and how much we lean on each other, and like how the the finished product is greater than the sum of its parts because of that collaboration. But
Mm-hmm.
like as an individual artist, you have muscles that you would love to have in working order just completely atrophy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And like when I have to draw a room or like, anything other than a prop that's scaled to a character, I have all those same issues of like balancing the line weight and like
Mm-hmm.
scale of detail and using, because now I'm using detail to describe basically what the camera is focused on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
um
yeah.
Whereas in character design, the everything is in perfect focus all the time,
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
use the camera analogy. So
My, I realized that I had something atrophy recently. And I don't know whether I ever learned it or whether I learned it and forgot it or whatever, but I think that because I find ugly drawings so funny, when I
Mm-hmm.
have to draw a like classically well constructed like Mickey Mouse with the perfect silhouette and construction and whatever, it takes me a lot longer to do that type of drawing than the drawing that would normally come out of me.
mm,
And a big part of that is because I don't work on a lot of shows like that with like classic cartooning education, and it's
Mm-hmm.
something that like I've had to work on a little bit again.
Dude, it's
yeah.
so humbling when you go on a show, when there's a moment in your career where you're like, oh, I think I can probably draw everything. And then you get on a show. Like when I got on the fucking like Looney Tunes, like the Bye Bye Bunny, and I was like, I cannot draw these characters for the life of me.
Yeah.
Like I know I say this in every freaking episode, like recently, but like that is the moment when you're like, all right, I'm never gonna draw Bugs Bunny ever again. This is too hard. I can't do it. Like,
That's what Clone High was like for me. Yeah.
oh my God, yeah.
Well, I've had a theory since high school that anybody who says, "Oh, I can draw a perfect Mickey Mouse on model," that is, they have no idea what they're talking about. They like any, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, or they're one of like a very small number of high level artists who, but like
Yeah.
another mentor of mine I've been very, very lucky to have in my life is Steven DiStefano, who is one of the big artists on the Mickey shorts. And every time we talk about it, he's like, "Oh yeah, Mickey's a bitch to draw. Like I never got that mouse right. I never felt like I got my Mickey's right." But that's just how it is. But and speaking of the atrophy thing, like almost exactly the same muscle. Steven Universe and Craig of the Creek made up the better part of 10 years of my career. And
Ooh, yeah.
one of the driving creative ideas behind those shows was an outgrowth of like, because Rebecca Sugar went to SVA uh, a few years behind Ian and I. She was a freshman when we were seniors, and so we had kind of organically worked up this idea along with Paul Valleco, who also was there in Rebecca's year, and like, you know, that a bunch of us passed through World Leaders, and you see the storyboards for the shitty Flash cartoon, right? And the boards are beautiful because it's somebody who got laid off from Disney Florida when they shut down the studio and moved back up to New York, and now they're just getting whatever job they can, and they can do anything they want, and they do the most unbelievable boards, and then it gets filtered through the on model process, and you get dead wooden animation on screen with no life and no expression. And it was heartbreaking, to see how good the work could be and how the pre-production work had so much of what we thought cartoons were missing. And so when we had our kind of turn at bat, we were like, well, what's a bigger loss? Having ugly drawings because they're off model and defining ugly as being off model, or having on model drawings that have none of the life and expression and specificity of the boards. Like, no contest. Losing all the life and specificity and energy and emotion of the boards is a much bigger loss than just like, well, that drawing's ugly because it's not perfectly on model. And so we made the choice to be incredibly faithful to the boards, to the point that on Steven Universe, we basically stopped doing special poses because we were trying to get the special poses so close to the board that we're just introducing an extra generation of drawings in between the board and what we want to see on screen. And there's no point in doing that. And Craig was much more traditional and controlled. We did a lot of special poses, but still, those special poses were pushed to almost exactly the same places the board artist had pushed them. I just introduced the volume and shape language of the show. But in terms of the way that they broke the model, I was as faithful as I could be to the board artist. And that's how I prefer to work. But that is not the traditional approach of a character designer doing a special pose. You're supposed to make it on model, and you're kind of supposed to like make your own choice, and like a lot of character designers will actually change the expression and it will change subtly. And I was trained to do that when I started, and I loved doing that when I started, but like I like, it's ridiculous, but I like grieve for what I'm losing from the board artist's drawing if I don't try to do everything I can to preserve exactly what they put in. Because speaking about Rebecca's eyes, like, we would literally move sometimes the mouth, say the mouth was low and moved away from the eyes and nose. We would move it half the width of the line. Say I was using a 9-pixel brush. We would move the mouth 4.5 pixels in order to more closely match the storyboard, because every change you make to a drawing does impact, those are micro expressions in 2D animation. Like,
that is true.
And so my kind of devotion to that approach has been tough to shake and tough to unlearn, in large part because I don't want to unlearn it,
Yeah. Dude, that's funny, because I was looking at a question from our YouTube listener, Bruce Watkinson 5254, and they asked what was the biggest change you face in your career on a day-to-day basis. And I feel that's kind of what you're talking about, unlearning. I feel like, especially when you've been on a show that you love so much. For me, I had that with Thundercats Roar, which I really love. Working on that show was so fun. And then when you're out of the show, you're like, well, that was that show. But now it's a new show that you're on, and you can't do what you were doing on that show because it was for that show. And it's like unlearning all those like fun things that, yeah,
that is the biggest challenge, is just, and it's honestly, it's harder now than it ever was. Like, when I started, the old method still existed, that you get a job at the studio, that studio has its roster of artists, and each artist gets trained onto the new gig. At the beginning of the gig, there's no training anymore. Like, we live, we're way past this. Nobody even looks at Tumblr anymore, but I have lived through the period of like, we need somebody who does something that's like kind of Toriyama, rest in peace, mixed with you know, like SpongeBob, mixed with The Simpsons, mixed with what, you know, and like you could just go on Tumblr and find the artist who does exactly that and hire them and put them on the show, you know? And so yeah, learning to adjust to a new style is a constant challenge, and it's kind of an open question every time you get a new gig, whether like how quickly you're going to be able to do that and how powerful you're going to be with that new style. Like the show I'm on now, I think I'm holding it down okay, but like I was too cocky coming in. I thought I was going to be able to pick up that style no problem and just run with it. And I'm, you know, it's months in now and I'm still struggling with the subtleties and the nuances of it, you know.
Mm. Yeah, that's really humbling to hear, like, you know, and you hear like other like experts in their field like admitting like, yeah, it's, you know, it's still like a challenge every time.
Yeah.
We have some great questions, but I do want to give a quick shout out to Nick Edwards, who asks on Instagram, if you could have a spaghetti dinner with 3 cartoonists, living or dead, who would you pick?
Okay.
Spaghetti dinner, important piece of information.
No silverware.
Yeah.
There's no silverware.
Well, I have
a
no silverware answer actually. So my most honest answer is I would have a home cooked spaghetti dinner with Daniel Klaus, Harvey Kurtzman, and Charles Schultz, because that's like what my heart wants.
A good lineup.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're not allowed to use utensils, I also kind of want to have like shitty diner spaghetti bolognese with Alex Toth and Howard Chaykin.
Why don't they deserve the fine Italian spaghetti? Why do they get the cheap diner spaghetti? What is it in your mind that separates these cartoonists? Like, these guys we're not giving these guys the good stuff.
You knocked the third one out of my head.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Who was it? Who was it gonna be? I had it. Whatever. It doesn't matter. But because like, okay, so Klaus, Schultz, and Kurtzman would be like just my dream. Like I would like love to, and I think that they would like be fans of one another, you know, and it would be like this lovely thing, you know. That's my romantic vision. But I would love to see Howard Chaykin argue with Alex Toth. You know, and like maybe I'd throw in like, I don't know, I wouldn't say Jaime Hernandez. I love Jaime too much, and I feel like he probably wouldn't engage in the foolishness. But like the best cartoonist dinners are when somebody's worked up and somebody's talking shit and we're talking shop. And if you haven't listened to Howard Chaykin speak, I'm gonna throw in Gil Kane as my third. There's this he's so I'm from New Jersey originally, and like I love studying, I love knowing things, you know what I mean? But like I come from, you know, very middle of the road kind of town, and like you use big words, you get made fun of, you know what I mean? So I have a chip on my shoulder about being like curious and hungry for knowledge, you know?
Yeah.
And I also have like, as much as I want knowledge and answers, like I have a middle class chip on my shoulder where I resent wealthy people who actually have it all because they have the privilege to have it all. Do you know what I mean? Which is not fair or generous, but it's honest. And so I kind of get the impression that Chaykin, Gil Kane, and Alex Toth are these like unbelievably studied, learned cartoonists who they would shame most modern academics, like the things that they know. But they're just from a time when like the class system was so ironclad and and the wealthy had so much more, and their level of education was kind of so much higher. It seems like that, like they consider they all seemed to have that same chip on their shoulder. Like, I'm just a working class guy, and I read a lot of books and I learned all this stuff, but I'm not one of them highfalutin dudes. Like, I don't know. So I think that would actually be the dinner that's more fun.
Honestly, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
So yeah.
That is so fun. That is such a great answer. Well, you kind of answered Phil Rinda's question. That was like, what kind of spaghetti would everyone eat?
Yes.
Do we have the spaghetti dinner and the home cooked one? Phil also asks, what's the biggest change in your creative thinking you've experienced while growing as a character designer? I think we talked about the spiral a little bit.
We did, yes, we did. But I think it's related to that for sure. But I think the spiral that sticks out as an answer to that is, sorry, I have to finish this. Sorry, Phil.
This ugly Steven.
He's not ugly.
I love
He's
it.
just a boy.
So this Steven that I drew next to yours is a Steven Universe tag that I used to draw on stuff. Like I used to draw like a bootleg Steven Universe that I used to draw on everything, and I did sneak one of these onto the Steven Universe fan art board, like as if it was a fan art drawing of Steven that a fan had submitted.
Really?
Yeah, and
That's
I
so
think it was
funny.
hanging for a while.
That's amazing.
And it just said SU at the bottom, and it was just like a little slip of paper.
Yeah.
That is
Oh my
so
God.
funny.
So
Sorry,
you say that, I'm like,
Dragon.
I've seen it. To answer Phil's question though, so it's like when I was young, it was all I could do to reach a professional level of drawing. Like just to get the model done and halfway close to being able to be approved took all the energy I had. And the first big revelation for me was like, man, it's about the choices. It's not about the drawings. Like it's about the choices. It's about the choices. And I was like gonna die on that hill. That was the only thing that mattered to me. If you took my first 5 years of Cal Arts, that's what you heard me, ranting about day in and day out, is like, just make specific choices. Nothing else matters. It's all about specific choices. And I was obsessed with like the nouns, like I said, like, that the size of the head matters so much more than like the specific way that it's drawn, and that there's an invisible boundary that's a definitive line between a drawing and a design, and the design exists outside of a drawing. And like that all these artists who are spending all this time making these drawings perfect and beautiful are actually kind of wasting time, because you're not spending enough time on the choices. And to some extent I do still believe that, but I've now kind of come around the circle and up a level, and I've realized that I have to do a beautiful drawing of all the choices. That it doesn't matter how well I've nailed down all those choices. The fact that I am a professional and I am capable of finishing my drawing, that final 10%, like we were talking about earlier, after I've like done the 90% of choice making, it doesn't mean that anybody else can look at my 90% drawing and see the final 10%. Like,
Yeah.
And now I'm really learning how much it's my responsibility to make all those great choices, and then make all the infinite choices that happen in the last 10% and nail it down and make it perfect and make it right. And that's not going to be anybody else's job. Nobody else is going to come along and do that for me. That's maybe the biggest part of my responsibility. So
I love that.
Yeah, that's great. Such a good illustration of the spiral too.
Yes.
That's a good stick. I'm really excited about this question from our patron Kay, but I'm gonna also mash it together with Swamp Alex. They're asking, what in the world is inspiring Sorkin-esque? I adore the playful vintage styling, coupled with absolutely unhinged writing. I wonder where it's going. And the other part is when does it return and what inspired the comic? Yeah.
Oh, well, man, nothing fills me up and like charges my battery like getting compliments on Sorkin-esque. It's like definitely my baby, so thank you. Okay, so Sorkin-esque is an idea that has been living in my brain for probably about 10 years, maybe close to it. While I was working on Steven Universe, I was watching a lot of Aaron Sorkin, The West Wing, The Newsroom, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And I was I was in such like an agitated, self-aware place personally because Steven Universe was the biggest thing I'd ever taken on, and I was like intensely self-conscious. Um,
Mhm.
and I love Aaron Sorkin, but like I started to really have this. Also, like part of Steven Universe was this new to me tool of hyper media literacy and reading kind of the subtext into everything and reading the meta narratives of things. And
Mhm.
so I'm watching these things that had once been kind of comfort food for me, and I'm like, oh my God, everyone's a self insert. This is all about him. Every time he wants to shut a woman down, he has a man quote something that I guess he must have read in the New York Times sports section that morning. Men just spout like, sports statistics out of nowhere when a woman is speaking too much and they want to shut her. Like I got really kind of antsy about it, and I had
Mhm.
this weird like double-edged love. It wasn't hate. I never hated it, but like love like uh mixed with like a pet peeve thing going on with it. And I was
Mhm.
watching interviews with him, and I was watching this one interview, and the interviewer said, "So you were addicted to crack cocaine while you were writing The West Wing?" And his response was, "Oh, that's not interesting at all. Let's not talk about that." And I was like completely beside myself. I was like, "So Steve Jobs is interesting, but this is not interesting?" Like The West Wing and The Newsroom are the most like pious, like pretentious, self important vision of Clinton era Democrats that exists in the world. Like, we are the only arbiters of intelligence and morality and human decency. And if you just let us have the wheel, everything would be so perfect and you'd finally be able to be proud of your country. And this is the vision of the world that looks down its nose at people who are addicted to crack. And you were addicted to crack, and you don't see why that's interesting. And it just drove me nuts. And I like off the cuff, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make a graphic novel called Sorkin-esque about Aaron Sorkin in the style of Aaron Sorkin. I was like, and I'll call it Sorkin-esque. And like, and I just like, I would say that to people occasionally. I remember telling Ben Levin, one of the
Uh-huh.
writers on Steven, and the creator, one of the creators of Craig of the Creek, and him like kind of saying it was like, oh, that's a good idea, you should do that. And I didn't for years, and I was only able to do it because I kind of held on to it long enough to realize like that was all projecting. And I was talking about myself, and I know what it's like to have to kick an addiction, or a
Oh.
few, doesn't matter which ones, but there have been multiple substances that I had to get myself off of, and I
Mhm.
was lucky to be able to do it kind of cold turkey. And but I realized like, oh, this makes me angry because like I know what that is. I know what it's like to like
Mhm.
abuse a substance and try to keep it all under wraps all day, and then pretend you're
Mhm.
maybe above that, or that's not, it wasn't something I wanted to share with people. Like, the amount of weed I was smoking, or, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Or the amount of alcohol I had consumed in my life,
Mhm.
Um, so, and then I also kind of realized that like I have no interest in actually writing about Aaron Sorkin. Um, Man is an incredible artist who's added a lot to my life. And uh, you know, I completely understand why he would say that's not interesting. Let's not talk about that. I don't beyond what I just said, I'm not particularly interested in discussing, that part of my life,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
like,
Sure.
and so, yeah, so, and I was like, all right, it's not about him, it's about me. And right around that time, I had also hit on the idea of like, why do I even want to make a comic? Because I'm obsessed with Dan Clowes and I want to do a Clowes comic.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, I'm just here's all the secrets of Sorkin-esque. I basically ripped off the format from Icehaven,
Mm-hmm.
which is 8 ball, I want to say 21, one of the greatest comics ever. But there's a larger, more realistic version of the character. There's a kind of smaller, I wouldn't say chibi, but that's the fastest way to get there. A Peanuts character, basically. And so I was like, yeah, all right, it's Dan. Like it's kind of this combination of these things that I'm interested in, and that it's me, but it's also not at all. Like this is how I answered the question that I'd had in school years and years ago of like, write what you know, what does that mean? How would I possibly do
Mm-hmm.
that? It was the first time I was ever able to be like, oh, I see. Like if I take enough true things about myself and I abstract them to the level that I am comfortable interacting with them,
Mm-hmm.
then I can say whatever I want because I'm really not talking about me. And I'm really not talking about Dan Clowes and I'm really not talking about Aaron Sorkin. I am
Mm-hmm.
actually talking about this strange third thing that I've created.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, I got it's just my inexperience. I've been a little surprised at how bizarre everyone finds the storytelling. I'm glad that they're like it's bizarre and that's exciting and not like it's amateur to the point of being illegible. You know.
No, because I think you have some like super great moments. I think there's like the strip that I really like that he did where like all of the students were like, he's a genius. This is amazing. Just because he said like a thing that seems almost so random. Like it almost looked like he just like barged into the room and he was like, oh this shit sucks. Here's what it is. And everyone's like, oh yeah, oh he's the yeah. And I
Yeah.
thought that moment is just so funny because it's so
Yes.
true. And everybody like we've all seen that at some point in our career or life
Mm-hmm.
where like someone's just like on this pedestal and it's like I don't know like what he said is just like a random thing, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that strip where I think that's the strip where like he's talking about we're gonna like baffle them with bullshit and
Yeah.
spout hot air. So I never described this, so this is probably why people find the comic so weird. That's the writer's room. So
Yeah.
in the world of Sorkin-esque, Dan Sorkin writes a comic strip called The Oval Office that is so wildly successful that he has a writer's room for his comic strip.
That's very funny.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
And another part of like the little nuggets, this is all I'm referencing the real Aaron Sorkin for, like, but he did write an essay for Entertainment Weekly years ago about how when he writes a monologue, it's like an aria in an
Oh my
opera.
god, that's funny
Oh.
though.
And how it moves in such a way and it rises in crescendos and builds to a fever pitch and then there's the release and and I at the time I was young and I was like, what pretentious bullshit this is. And it's like you're good, like, Quentin Tarantino called him the greatest dialoguist working currently, and he may not be wrong, but like, come on, dude. Like, but so
It's
I just gave that to his writer's room where they were like, oh my, it's like an aria. And he's like, all right, let's not be so pretentious. But that's been the joy of the comic for me. It's just like, because for years it was like, I know exactly what I want to talk about, but I have no, like, how do I talk about how pretentious a writer,
mhm.
like I didn't have any shape for it.
Yeah, yeah.
But the cool thing is it's like it really writes itself. Like
Hmm.
when I get to the drafting stage, like I just kind of I pull out a clipboard and a bunch of paper and I write it with thumbs, like you would a storyboard.
Yeah.
And it's either right or it's wrong. And I don't know why, but I know very, very clearly, like good or nothing.
Hmm.
So anyway, like there are multiple chapters of Sorkin-esque that are written Like they're done. It's
Whoa.
scripted. I'm gonna keep going with this thing. I have been in the very fortunate position to be too busy to work on it lately,
Mm.
but my schedule is finally easing up. So I'm chapter 2 is just about halfway finished, and I'm hoping within the next month it'll start releasing.
You heard it first on Creative Block, everybody. Sorkin-esque returns.
Yes, for all
Nice.
exactly 350 people who care. Because, you know, through analytics, I can tell that there are exactly 350 people who care.
But you know, that's gonna like, I feel like when I started doing Rodney and just posting webcomics and just having like a couple people who like comment is just like the best thing because you're like, I just want somebody to like read it, enjoy it, and write a comment. It's like the, I don't know. Then you're
it
like,
is
okay, I made something worthwhile, you know?
it's the greatest thing in the world. It
Yeah.
like having
Mhm.
those 350 people respond and like interact and actually weirdly knowing like it's this number. It's like this is this number. Like I've
Mhm.
never had that experience with anything else I've ever put up on social media, you know? Like where there
Yeah.
is tangibly a core group of people who are showing up for this thing. I nothing has ever been as gratifying. Like even seeing a little kid dressed up as at Comic-Con like a character that you designed like doesn't compete with like this little group of people who seem to like care about this comic that I made.
I would agree. I think that's like, and I don't know if that has changed anything for you, but I feel like for me, ever since I have my webcomic and people care about it, I feel like so many of my needs are fulfilled by it that
Mm.
that it's really hard to want to stay in a corporate system. Well, you have to do it for the money, right? But I'm
No,
like,
yeah. Well,
you know, all my artistic needs are fulfilled through the comic.
yeah, my new dream job is making things for myself, by myself, you know,
Yeah.
and being able to save myself off of that. And that may never happen and I'll be fine with it, you know? Like I am
Hmm.
very happy with my career. I wouldn't trade it for the world and I love being able to do what I do and sometimes having time for personal projects. Um but yeah, and also like just being very realistic, like you do enough work and I get paid very well for it and I've made a nice life for myself off of it, but like you do enough work for these giant, you know, multi-million dollar productions that make all kinds of money, but that you will never own a single piece of. Like
Yeah.
Hmm.
I have no ambition to create a show for a network. I just
Hmm.
don't want to do it. I'm not saying I won't ever do it, but if it happens, it'll be because I slipped and fell into it, and not because I actively pursued it. It's just
Hmm.
the amount of work that that takes to sell the rights to all of it.
Yeah.
Personally, and this is, you know, I'm so glad that other people do that, but personally, I would just rather own what I'm making and have the chance for it to be successful and the likelihood that it won't really ever make much money, you know.
Hmm.
That's kind of where I'm at career wise. Or not career wise. No, that's not where I'm at career wise. That's where I'm at artistic ambition wise. You know, that's
Hmm.
replaced the dreams I had as a kid. Career wise, I'm good. I just want to keep it going, you know.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, because you are somebody that balances a long running personal project in combination with working with studios. Yeah, and this is the name of the show, but how do you push through creative block, and maybe how does that, if it does differ in between working on a job versus working on your personal stuff, is there any difference in between how you work through being stumped with an idea or stumped with a execution on something, a problem?
Mm, good question. Um, yes, there is a difference. So the way I work through it on the job is like physically. Like I put the pen down and I go until it's done. Even if it feels terrible, even if I hate it, even if I'm not having fun, I just keep going. There are no, you know, to a certain extent after I had kids, I realized how precious time was. And so I try not to waste time being unproductive and I would rather, you know, take 40 minutes away from my desk and go see my kids, you know. I work at home, they're upstairs, you know, and then come back refreshed and recharged and try again. But pr- short of that, for work, it's just power through.
Sure.
Personal, I'm very new to keeping up a personal project. Like Sorkin-esque is, kind of just begun. There's only 12 strips out. That's harder because I'm completely unwilling to do that. Like, I'm either going to do it exactly how I want it to be done or I won't do it. But now I'm really starting, like, it's been 3.5 months since I put up the last strip, and I had a schedule that I was keeping to, and it's completely blown. And, like, that's painful now. Like, it's really, I want to get back to that really, really badly. And I know that momentum is a part of it. But at the same time, I am completely unwilling to put out a strip that I'm not happy with. It's the whole point for me is to make something that I'm proud of and that I stand behind. And then when I look at it, I'm like, yes, this is what I wanted to make. And it exists now, and that fills me up. So yeah, kind of opposite approaches. And Sorkin-esque, like I said, like when I write that, it's from the gut, it's from the subconscious, it's like it flows and I'm inspired, or it doesn't and I don't do it, and work is totally the opposite. I cannot afford the luxury of inspiration at work. I just have to do work.
Respect it.
Yep. Great answer. Very professional answer. I want to give a quick shout out to Tattoo by Maine, Hank.Humble, Claudes, SpongeBob 38, and Okaden 5141. Love your guys' questions. This was just such a great interview that we had so many things to talk about and dissect that we unfortunately couldn't get to your questions, but we really appreciate you guys engaging and interacting with us and being interested in our guests. Many thanks. And I think with that, Danny, that is the end of this creative blog. Danny, thanks for being our guest and sharing your story.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. It was a pleasure.
And thanks to our listeners. Follow us on social media at CRTV Block, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor Clemens for editing the podcast, Marco for helping us produce the show, and Ibuka for creating the short clips we've been putting out.
If you love our show, you can support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews and access to our Discord community. And another great way to support us is to interact with our content. You can comment, you can subscribe, you can like, you can share. Please tell everybody about our podcast. Getting more ears or eyes on it helps us grow, get more money. We can pay our little team a better wage, all of these great things. Click the links in the description of this episode for Danny's social media and for our Patreon links. I've been your host, V.
And I was Sean. Keep being creative. I want to see those bootleg Steven Universe drawings of your own. And we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.